Here we are again. It's another TeaTime. Got some returning faces here. It is Nike. It is Sneb. It is Bloom. And, you know, this is basically a debate. This is a call-out. You know, I was talking to Sneb about the LFG the other day, about making groups, about, you know, the process of making groups, you know, maybe why players don't feel empowered to make groups.
This idea of, like, leading groups in Guild Wars 2 is not a thing you come across in other MMOs, really, I think. Like, you're just the party leader, and there's no responsibility on you as the party leader necessarily to, like, understand what you need to do for that dungeon or raid fight or whatever. That responsibility usually in games like this is, like, on the tank. Like, imagine if you played WoW or Final Fantasy and the only way you could open a group is if you played as the tank.
I think there is a perception that if you're commanding that you have to do a lot, but I actually believe that perception has created a reality. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I reckon it would have to be, for people to use the LFG, I think you would need a 90% win rate of an auto matchmaker. I think any lower than 90%, I think people would start using it. Here we are. Here we are again. It's another TeaTime. We've got some returning faces here. It is Nike. It is Sneb. It is Bloom. And, you know, this is basically a debate. This is a call-out. You know, I was talking to Sneb about the LFG the other day, about making groups, about, you know, the process of making groups, you know, maybe why players don't feel empowered to make groups. Bloom, he was just going berserk. He was calling me out and saying, you guys are idiots. You're completely missing it. You've got no idea. He was completely going insane, actually. You know, I had to block him temporarily because I just couldn't handle it at the time. But here we are. I've mustered up the strength to actually have the conversation about the LFG. That's of course a joke, just to double check that. But anyway, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to the show. And actually, I think I'm gonna let you open it up, Bloom, out of fear, to be honest. I'm scared.
Okay.
Just to open it up for us here, like in your mind, give us your take on what exactly is going on with the LFG, and perhaps some of the things that you thought that are often overlooked in that conversation about perhaps why why players don't end up making groups and why some other players might end up making groups and so on. Hit us with it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I think the main thing that passes my mind whenever I hear these conversations is, like, why is this such a Guild Wars 2 centric issue? Because I play a lot of other MMOs, and I never come across this. No, like, WoW or Final Fantasy podcasts or anything that I listen to are talking about, like, leadership and how they can, like, inspire the community to start leading groups or whatever. It's so, like, it's such a specifically Guild Wars 2 problem, which I think is really interesting. I think communities like this are a good way to get a portion of the, like, community involved, but obviously we all know that, like, not everyone watches or consumes Guild Wars 2 content. Like, such a small portion watches YouTube content, and a smaller portion probably watches stream content, so they're probably not getting all the, like, info that they need. And then I think, like, you know, your Discord, Sneb, really good. You've got, like, over 80 statics, which is really awesome. But then those groups are being formed outside the LFG, and it's kind of like, I know it's really hard to use the LFG system in-game, but I guess that kind of, like, saps people away from using the LFG in-game if they're being organized in the Discords. And I've never once had to use Discord in any other MMO. You just organize it all in-game. And I think the main issue to me is, like, the commander tag. And I think you guys covered it in your previous, like, discussion. Like, the commander tag being the thing that you need to organize groups and to, like, lead groups, I think is a real problem. This idea of, like, leading groups in Guild Wars 2 is not a thing you come across in other MMOs, really, I think. Like, you're just the party leader, and there's no responsibility on you as the party leader necessarily to, like, understand what you need to do for that dungeon or raid fight or whatever. That responsibility usually in games like this is like on the tank. And that's why people are so scared of playing tanks in these MMOs, because it means they've got to learn so much more about these encounters and know how they work already. And like imagine if you played WoW or Final Fantasy and the only way you could open a group is if you played as the tank. You can't do it without playing tank. You just have, I think that is, you'd end up with the same problem as Guild Wars, where you've got too many people afraid to open their groups because they're afraid of playing tank. They're afraid of like knowing the encounter and having that much responsibility. So I think step one is obviously giving like that capability of moving around groups and whatnot to just any party leader, not just the commander tag, because that is scary. I know you guys have discussed it in the past, but what are your stances on it at the moment?
Yeah, I think that the expectations are definitely they're definitely pretty spooky, for sure. That I think a lot of players have. You know, the weird thing about this is that I think you immediately have to talk about perception, because I actually think that you aren't actually expected to do that much as the commander. In my opinion, the actual practical kind of requirements, as it were, in a group for a commander is usually, well, it depends on the group, of course. If it's a training group, then I think the commander might be a little bit more expected to potentially perform a bit of a leadership role and maybe explain things if they're creating a training squad, but not always, actually. But I'd say, I'm not gonna lie, the main requirements are move people around into subgroups, right? Like that, I think that actually is something that is a little bit spooky, actually. Because think about that. What does that actually mean? That means that you kind of need to know how to fit the group together, right? And that isn't necessarily explained in the game anywhere. That's an entirely player-constructed thing, right? This concept of, okay, we're going to have 1 quickness, 1 alacrity, and 3 DPS. We're going to do that twice. Have 1 healer, make sure there's a tank there. I think that's actually a big part of the problem, is actually understanding how to build a group. Because if you think about it, in other games, especially games that have a trinity, the game actually does this for you, right? It says, okay, 1 tank, 1 healer, 3 DPS, job done. Easy peasy, love to see it. Whereas in Guild Wars 2, theoretically speaking, we could decide that we want 3 healers per group tomorrow, right? If the community said that, then it would be, right? That would just be the way it is. If people decide that quickness isn't worth it anymore, then yeah, all of a sudden nobody would run quickness anymore, and that entire concept would dissolve into nothingness. These are just examples, of course. I mean, I don't think that's very likely, but yeah, the fact that it is a bit more community defined and it does have a bit of a knowledge barrier to it, I think is definitely something that's a little bit spooky for sure. But I do think that the idea that, oh, if you're the commander, you have to know every mechanic and you have to do everything perfectly and tell everyone exactly what to do. I think actually, no, I don't think that actually happens very often. In fact, there's actually a bit of a meme, of course. I'm sure anyone who raids and has used the LFG, there's a bit of a meme about commanders, right? Is that commanders will quite often absolutely have no clue, set requirements that they themselves don't meet, right? And then feed immediately in raid bosses. Of course, it's not exactly prevalent. This is, of course, a hilarious joke, once again. But, I don't think there really is this super high expectation. But again, I think that one of the reasons, and this is something that I think me and Sneb were chatting about, and I think this is a really, really big one. One of the problems is that expectations and perceptions are ridiculously distorted because there is such a very high degree of separation between these communities, right? The raid community is, or not even raid community, the instanced content community is very separated from the non-instanced content community. And as a result of that, there is this communication breakdown that we spoke about on a previous TeaTime, where the actual perspective on these two communities from, going both ways becomes incredibly distorted. And I think you end up with these incredibly exaggerated expectations that don't really actually manifest in reality when you really get down there. But that perception is, of course, incredibly important, right? If you you perceive something to be extremely difficult or extremely intimidating, that's going to significantly reduce the probability that you actually get into it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as well, there's an implied difficulty with the fact that you have to go through the LFG and that there's no random match-made system. Because I think that extra step of having to post your group to this public LFG system, it already, like, in other games, doing that is like in WoW, it's your like Mythic plus, your like normal raiding, that sort of thing. So it's already like, even though the content, like the raid strikes, aren't actually that challenging, there's like an implied difficulty because you have to go through the LFG, and it makes it seem like it's supposed to be this like challenging content because you need to have a commander who's, you know, paid 300 gold for a tag so that you can move around groups, and you've got to post into the LFG, and you've got to make sure the roles are lined up. Yeah, all of that just like basically skews perception on how difficult this content is. But I think that's the most important thing, and I don't know how you really change it from like a community perspective. Like, I don't know how you could like push it enough that people change their minds. I think at this point, it's really on ArenaNet to facilitate, you know, the LFG system and make it a bit more friendly. The whole like party composition sort of thing, just making that stuff more friendly. I think it's on ArenaNet to push it at this point, because I think the community is at the point now where, I don't know, it's staying the same to me. I don't know. I haven't noticed like any significant changes over the years with the LFG. But there's also been no real changes with the LFG either. So
I don't want to bring Sneb on into this as well. So Sneb, what's your take on the current LFG situation? Because of course you yourself, you're very heavily involved in group organization, right? And getting players into content and so on.
I kind of agree and disagree with you. I think there is a perception that if you're commanding that you have to do a lot, but I actually believe that perception has created a reality. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Everyone thinks that the commander is supposed to do all of these things, and, you know, it's sort of built up and built up and built up. You know, the tag, it means so much. Like everybody is just kind of built around that. Plus the system itself, the commander, if you have a commander tag and you are the commander, then it necessitates that you put down markers and people sort of expect you to make the subgroups, et cetera, et cetera. So what that means is that when people go in and you have the tag, there is actually a little bit more pressure on you. They expect you to know a lot more than you really need to, but there's sort of this community pressure, the social pressure that is sort of thrust upon the commander, thinking, okay, well, you now have to make all the subgroups. You gotta, if something goes wrong, you need to be the one to figure out what it is. You're the one who's gonna tell us. And I think that, you know, those sorts of things, they're sort of community based. That's just what people think now, and it's sort of become that way because people think it. It's cyclical. But otherwise, you're right. Like, we put all of these unnecessary expectations of what a commander can or can't do. Heck, if you've never done raids before, you can just chuck up a tag and say, never done raids, just trying to do wing one, let's figure it out. And people will join eventually. So we think that there's a lot more than there actually is required of a commander, but because we think that, it kind of makes it so.
The best groups on the LFG are the ones that don't even have the commander tag. And they say, like, wing one training need commander. Those are the best groups on the LFG.
Well, they're asking for the tag, right?
That's not even a safari. That's like getting like airdropped into the middle of the jungle, and you have to fight your way out. It's great.
Well, to be clear, this is the problem with the tag, right? Because everything is very socially constructed, right? In the LFG perception, people don't take groups that don't have a commander as seriously. That is actually just true, right?
Yeah, you know you're getting like that. It's like there's like the commander tag. Yes, the 300 gold can either be like an insurmountable barrier, or it can be like really nothing at all. Yeah. But just the fact that you didn't meet it at all is just like a really bad sign. Like, it's a sign that you probably don't have 6 matching runes, or there's a very good chance you don't have 6 matching runes. You know, like
boy.
maybe you just have a couple pieces of dire gear hanging out in your build because that's what dropped. You know, that's the vibe of when someone.
But do you not remember 2 weeks ago when I brought this very thing up?
No.
I got some pretty heavy criticism in the comments for this. I said
Yeah.
something along the lines of, when you see an ad in the LFG where someone says Wing 1 looking for commander, it feels or is perceived like they want you to do all of the work. Now, I think I made a mistake in not elaborating on that a little bit, because what I hope, I kind of implied it, but I didn't say it explicitly. The problem is not with the person, it's with the system, right? The person is doing exactly what they should do. They're putting themselves out there. They're trying to get the thing done, but they don't have the tag, so they can't organize the subgroups and get things done, which is a system problem. It's bad. It makes it so that they're forced to do that if they don't have the tag. So that's a positive thing that they're putting themselves out there. But the issue is exactly the way it's perceived. Because if I have a tag, why wouldn't I just make my own group and post my own requirements and have my own group culture? Otherwise, it's kind of this awkward dance because you're joining their group and now you're taking over their group and imposing requirements. And what if they don't meet the requirements, right? What if what they really meant by that is, hey, I'm just wanting to learn Wing 1, but I need someone to help me. Well, now you're like, oh, well, I wanted to do Wing 1, but I want to blast through it. Now you have incongruent expectations. It's a little bit awkward. So very few people join those groups because of this weird dance with how leadership in groups forms. So it really sucks, honestly, because you have people that want to put themselves out there. Maybe they're newer to the game. Maybe they don't have the 300 gold because they blew all of their gold on getting gear so they could just get into a raid. But now they can't form their own groups, and they don't have the requirements to get into more experienced groups. So they feel like they can't make their own group, and so they're forced to wait for someone else to make a group. And I think that's exactly what Bloom was getting at before, right? No other game seems to have this problem. I don't really know because I don't play a lot of other games. But it is very awkward. I think it's a real shame for players that really want to get out there and, you know, they're willing to put themselves out there and make a group. The tools and the system necessitates that you spend 300 gold on a tag, and that's brutal.
Yeah, and I mean, I like to add to that. Like, I played the game for I think 3,000 hours or something, and I only just got a commander tag last year, and the only reason I got it was because Teapot was giving them away in a stream. I think 300 gold is a lot. Like, it doesn't sound like a lot for people who know how to get gold in Guild Wars 2, but it is, because everything in Guild Wars 2 is competing for your gold. Like, gold is everything. Trying to determine whether spending 300 on this tag is very difficult, and like, there's just, it's a really hard trade, even as someone who's spent a lot of time in the game, because other people have commander tags, and you're like, well, I'll just let other people command, and I'll save 300 gold, and I'll use it for something else. Yeah.
And I would say that it is 100% worth it. It definitely is. In my opinion, it is the biggest upgrade your account can possibly get. However, I actually think that's totally irrelevant. From the perspective of a player who's kind of looking at it, it's just this monolithic number that it's very difficult to evaluate, right? Like, it's super hard to convince a player that, hey, this is a really good investment. Like, especially as a new player, that's a lot of gold, right? That's a good chunk of gold to grind out there. And of course, farming gold is definitely one of those things that is not widely understood in the community as well, and that makes it even worse, right? If you're making, say, 5 gold an hour, then yeah, that commander tag is pretty painful, to be honest. So yeah, look, we can kind of cut to the chase here. In my opinion, the commander tag should be changed in a fairly significant way. I think that the baseline functionality for the tag should be ready checks, markers, and some kind of leader so you can manage groups, right? Because right now, this doesn't happen very often, to be clear, but I definitely think it is a fundamental flaw with the system. And because actually, yeah, seriously, this happened to me on my 0 to Hero when I didn't have the tag. Check this out. I made a strike mission group for Icebrood Saga strike missions on my 0 to Hero. Someone merged into my group and said, "Oh, hi guys, actually, we're doing Wing 1. And I'm like, what do you mean we're doing Wing 1? This is a strike mission group. And the thing is, they had the tag, right? So they just yoinked my group, right? And they were like, "Oh yeah, we're doing Wing 1, by the way." Like, what do you mean? Like, this is completely insane, right? And yeah, the entire system needs to be like significantly upgraded. For sure. Like, and ready check, markers, leadership functionality, or, like party leader should be made baseline. If there needs to be the 300 gold as a gold sink, that's fair enough. I get it. But that could be for, say, having a 50-player squad, right? For having a public pin, right? Like having the little icon on the map, right? That's what you pay 300 gold for. I think that's fine, right? If we got to do that, we got to do that. Because it's, gold sinks, they are relevant, for sure. And yeah, that's the name.
And I think for now, at least, I think we should try and normalize the idea of not having a commander tag for strikes and stuff. I know in my videos, at least,
you can't do that though.
You can move yourself.
Ooh, debate.
You can't
you can
though.
Move yourself in.
You're too idyllic. That's not gonna happen.
Too idyllic. I think we should just push the idea that, I didn't even know you could move yourself without the commander tag. I thought you needed the commander tag to move people. Exactly. So I think, as an easy band-aid fix, ArenaNet just need a little tutorial thing saying, hey, you can move yourself in the subgroup when you first join a squad. Yeah. And you can just have people just talk to each other, socialize, just talk about what you need in each subgroup, and have everyone move themselves, and you're sorted out.
I've tried that. It doesn't work.
Frustrating.
I think one thing they can do is get rid of the party system and just have squad be the only grouping method, so that people, even in 3-man, I'm playing with my friends in the open world, you, instead of joining a party, you make a squad with 3 men, so you get people used to the squad stuff early, rather than it being like this alien thing they have to learn at endgame.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, I want to touch on what Bloom said, because I promise I wasn't trying to be intentionally contentious, but it's a huge issue, because what you said is absolutely true. We should encourage people to just make groups and just to play. The problem is I don't like saying that, because it trivializes the suffering that is not having a commander tag in the squad. If you don't have a commander tag in the squad and somebody goes to the bathroom, you can't move them. You're stalled. Like you hit roadblocks constantly without being able to just have one person control everything. I've tested this a lot. I've tried to go in and not have a tag, and usually what ends up happening is everyone just says, "Who's going to tag up? Who's going to tag up?" And then everyone's like, "None of us have tags," and they all leave, which is really unfortunate. But the perception is that you can't do it without the tag, and the problem is that I think that perception is kind of right, because the effort and the trouble of trying to get everyone to move properly is not worth it. So I think what ends up happening if you don't have a tag is people will just go in without subgroups. And frankly, I know this hurts to say, but if the alternative if it's playing or play without subgroups on something like the easier strike missions, just play without the subgroups, I guess. But otherwise, I think people have this perception that they have to play a certain way, right? They have to play how they see people playing on YouTube or whatever. And as a result, they don't want to play inefficiently.
I'm curious to know, because I think that's how people who are in the who want to raid or want to strike feel. But I think a lot of open world players don't care about subgroups. And I think if you got a bunch of those open world players and they knew they could just start up their own group in raids or whatever, they'd do it. And I don't think they'd even care that there's no subgroups. If that makes sense.
Well, you have the the kind of the reflection of the subgroup stuff happening there. So I think what happens is that it's certainly true that, yeah, obviously a lot of players who play in open world aren't, really super bothered about stuff like this, but they perceive that it's required in the game, and they go, okay, yeah, then I'm not interested, basically. Right? I think, I think players go, okay, well, yeah, I don't really want to engage with this and like that. I don't want to have to, be very strict and optimize about the way I play, which is, of course, totally fair. And then go, okay, yeah, well, I don't want to then, right? And again, I think that there's a really fine line when talking about this, because there definitely is a knowledge barrier, but it's certainly not as strict. I think they'll overstate and overestimate the strictness, right, of how you have to play this content, right? That's the problem. Don't get me wrong. There is a big step, right, that you need to take. You do need to, understand how it works and how to throw together groups and how to put it together, but it's actually very mushy, right? Like, if you've got a little bit of extra quickness, or if you don't have perfect uptime, who cares, right? Like, it's not gonna delete your group off the face of the earth, right? At least not for for raids and strikes, right? It's not the end of the world. If you're getting into challenge modes, then okay, yeah, fair enough. Oh yeah, what, the 10 fire wizard, or well, core Ellie Slothosaur, I believe.
I did 10 core Ellie last night. I got through all of wing 1, 2, and 4. 10 core elementalists. And by the way, at Gorseval, we did not do updrafts. We met the DPS check.
Yeah, it's not a surprise.
I think that's a testament to the fact that you don't actually alacrity and quickness is good, but you can do it. You can do all. I don't think any of the content is so hard. Like, aside from the CMs or whatever, I don't think any of the content is hard enough that we have to be this strict on alacrity and quickness and whatnot.
It definitely is.
Counterpoint.
Oh yeah, boom, go. Let's go. Boom.
If the group doesn't have alacrity and quickness, I'm out. I'm hitting the leave group, and I'll tell I will be like, whoever's making alacrity for my group, you suck. You need to figure it out. Whatever you're doing, figure it out.
Counterpoint.
I'm out. Because life is too short. We only have limited time on the earth, and being in groups where you don't have alacrity is not worth your limited time on this earth. You have got to maximize your happiness, people, and no one's going to do that besides you. So do it.
The spirit of what Bloom is saying there, though, is that rather than waiting for the group to be perfect, just go and do it.
Do it.
Because if you're waiting for it to be perfect all the time, especially in a pickup group, it's just not going to happen.
I mean, look, to give an actual full-on example of this, because it's all very well and good to say that, but look, downtime is the biggest factor in slowing you down. It always is. And a perfect example of this was, of course, the world's first sub-2 hour raid full clear, which was done very deliberately by myself and a bunch of others on the most ridiculously over-tanked setup ever, with heal Tempest and heal Necro, double boon chrono, and then 5 DPS scourges, or 6 DPS scourges rather, on top of that. It was absolutely ridiculous. But because we had 0 downtime and we tried to go vaguely fast, right, we ended up with a really, really fast kill time. Having the optimal DPS setup, honestly, is not your main factor for completion speed. It's always going to be, 1, how good you are at the game, and 2, if you're able to not sit around doing nothing for 20 minutes.
100%, yeah. And so, oh, go ahead, Sam.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to move the topic on to a different, somewhat related, but...
okay.
So you go ahead. You shoot your shot.
One more thing, then. With regards to boons, the whole reason I did the 10 core elementalist thing was to show that if you're willing to problem solve and really think about the mechanics and how your class works, because we had to do some funny stuff, right? We had to be like, okay, we all got to change our utility skills, or we will not be able to do this. Especially at Sloth, that was a bit of a grind, right? And even Veil Guardian, we had to think about the comp quite a bit.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, you can clear this content without being perfect.
Yeah.
That's what matters. You do not have to be perfect to clear the content. What I think is interesting, though, and the thing that I noted last night is, okay, it's all fine and dandy that 10 really experienced players who have played for thousands of hours can go and do this with 10 core elementalists. The average player is probably not going to be able to do that. And it's only because we're really experienced in the bosses. And that is a very fair criticism. However, I think if more players understood just how powerful certain builds were, or if they broke out of the sort of cultural, you must have only 2 healers and only 2 people giving certain boons. If people overcapped and they played things that were just really, really strong, I really believe that a lot of this stuff would be made a lot more trivial than it is. I think people would have a way easier time clearing. If, for example, if people ran 3 healers at Veil Guardian, I think it would be way easier. I think so many groups are just like, oh, you have to skip the greens and you have to play with only 2 healers. And when they do that, they're thinking that they're going to speed up the run, but in reality, they're slowing themselves down due to wipes. If you're not super, super experienced, just play wicked safe stuff. Overcap on break bar stuff. Switch some damage utilities to break bar or extra Condi cleanse.
Yeah.
When you do this, you will one-shot way more stuff. Like when I go into pickup groups lately, I like playing Blood Scourge because I still contribute on the damage. I bring Omega CC, and if somebody goes down, I instantly res them. And this dramatically increases your win rate. Now, again, you could argue, oh, well, that's because you're an experienced player. And this is true. I will increase it a lot more because I know the fights really well. But if every newer player was playing stuff like that or thinking about overcapping and thinking about playing stuff that provides barrier, that has a lot of CC, then it would be made a lot easier. The issue is that we have to maybe display those builds more and talk about how good they are as a community.
Well, I also think there's some work to be done, again, reducing the rigidity of thinking, right? Not being so kind of bound to the exact way that it has to be, right? Because I think that
razor thin margins.
It's weird to me because I think the perception is certainly of myself, right? People are going to look at players like me, Nike, and honestly, definitely you as well, Sneb. Actually, not sure about Bloom. Bloom probably a complete
not
noob.
Me. Don't look to me.
But as like, oh yeah, these are like the tryhard players. Whoa, that Teapot guy, he's such a tryhard, right? And it's funny that I'm the one as the quote unquote tryhard saying, yeah, just kind of get in there and just play what you want. If you got to run heal scourge or 3 healers, you do what you got to do, right? But then there are going to be pugs who are, or the perception is, right, is that everyone who's in raid's like, no, you must run this way or you'll be purged immediately, right? Like we cannot deviate from the defined meta comp in any way, otherwise we instantly feed, right? And this goes to anything else. Yeah, this is a great point brought up by Nika as well. What about changing your utility skills, right, to adapt to the encounter, right? Stuff like this. Yep. These are the things that really end up causing a lot of problems, I think, is overly rigid thinking and lack of flexibility in group making, but also just like build crafting and so on.
I agree.
Yes. I'm curious what Bloom had to say. There was a topic slight shift.
Yeah.
Bring it in.
So, how do we feel about matchmaking? I know this is like a contentious topic, and everyone's like, I was on the side of people going like, no, it's too complicated in Guild Wars. You can't do it. I am tired of that excuse. I have played in like recently. I played Lost Ark. I played Destiny. They also have incredibly light, loose Trinity systems. And I think there's instance content in Guild Wars 2 that's easy enough that you can do with any random party composition. I think tier 1, tier 2 fractals could have matchmaking. I think like the early strikes could have matchmaking, like proper matchmaking, not jump into a public instance and wait inside the public instance as people fill up. I mean, like queue in, like a PvP match, go on about your day until you fully fill up and you're in. I think it's different to the public system where you've got to go over to the portal, you got to jump in there, you got to sit around twiddling your thumbs for like half an hour.
PvP has that problem though. Like
Has what
PvP,
problem?
you go in, and what if 3 people are playing support? You lose.
I think But that is okay. It's better for them to go in and try and lose than to literally never step into the content.
How is
And I
that?
think, and
How is that different than the? Well, okay, it is different because it would only put you in the match when it's ready, I guess, right?
yeah, yes.
But beyond that, okay, this is I'm playing devil's advocate here because I do
Yeah, yeah.
somewhat agree that we need something like this. I'm just trying to illustrate that there are problems with this and what are the solutions that we can come up with to try to
Yeah.
solve these problems.
Yeah.
So this is what happens. I queue up and I'm like, I never want to play support. I'm only going to play DPS.
Yeah.
I go in. Everyone says DPS, 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 DPS. There's 10 DPS. You're at a stalemate. What happens? I guarantee 4 people leave instantly. Now what? Does it re-queue?
Yeah, why not?
The problem isn't like once you get to the point where you like actually have people who know what the different roles are, like you're 90% of the way there. The problem is when you join you join the group, like people join the group, it's getting ready to go, and you notice that like 5 out of the 10 people have less than 1,000 AP, and they look like they're in starter gear, and you're like, look at the time, gotta go, guys.
The thing is,
See you guys later.
I think the thing is, the people that are annoyed by that aren't going to use the matchmaking system. They just use the LFG system, and that's it. Like once
I
you
just worry
you're
that
at
the
that
matchmaking
point,
system would just then have like noob stink on it, and
I think that's okay. I think
I
yeah,
wouldn't go as far as
and-
saying that. But...
yeah, well, it's like people like what the problem is, like the noobs, they're not going to be like, well, I'm a noob, so it doesn't matter that all the people that join these groups are noobs. It's fine. What's going to end up happening is they're going to go, I'm a noob, but I'm a good noob. I'll never play with the trash that join these groups, even though they are in fact trash. Like that's
Here's what's actually going to happen. This is maybe a slightly more empathetic take. What's going to happen is you're kind of right. The experienced players might not use that system because they don't want to play with newer players. And you know what? Fair enough. That sucks, but fair enough. So you go in and it's 10 new players and you just never finish the content. Like the content feels insurmountable because there's no one there to be like, hey, this is what's going wrong. And the issue is that this feeds into a bigger problem with the game not giving you very good feedback. And so this group of 10 players, though they're trying and trying and trying, they just can't figure out why they're failing. And they can't quite, they're just kind of stuck. I think that would suck. No?
My response to this is, who cares? And I think we're like projecting on players that just want to try the content. I think they actually don't care. Like I think we need to have some sort of like progression culture in Guild Wars 2. And I think Skynegang has proved that a lot of people just want to play with people of similar skill level. And a lot of new players I know just want to play, like they want to get into raids blind with a group of other completely new players. I know that there's plenty of players that want to just slam their head against a wall and figure it out themselves. And like the LFG system would still be there once you understand group composition and you want to, transfer over to that. But in the interim, I think like just the easier stuff, you could just slam a bunch of newbies into the content and they'd have a good time. I don't think failure is, especially like in MMOs, I think people are used to some sort of like progression. So I don't think it's like as much of an issue. Because if they hate it, then you don't have to use the matchmaking. There's an LFG system if you want to set it up and tailor it specifically how you want. But
yeah, I agree. But my concern is that okay, if it's for like the IBS strikes, I really don't think that's that big of a deal. I think most people would figure it out eventually. Because there aren't that many mechanics, whether or not you have boons and stuff doesn't really matter very much at all there, right? Your gear matters less. Like the barrier to entry is quite low. But the moment you add that to anything above that, I feel like the players suffer because it's just very difficult to tell what's going wrong. If you don't have arc DPS, you have no idea that the elementalist standing next to you is in full dire gear. And some of it is blue and some of it is white, and they're doing 200 DPS. And that's not a slam on them, but that just means that they might not be fully prepared for instance content, and you have no way of letting them know and trying to help them. You're just kind of stuck in this group that you're constantly bashing your head against the wall, but the things that you need to change aren't actually even mechanically based at that point. They're like build based and gear based, but there's no way that you can know that.
Yeah. I mean, to add to that, do you think that there's a way to have basically like a minimum viable stat composition? Like you could queue and you need
Gear
a minimum
score,
of this.
yes.
Like
There we
not
go.
even you don't even need gear score because we've already got stats in the game, and just having a minimum thingy.
Minimum stat
would be
combo,
enough.
like
Minimum,
total
like-
stats must exceed
Yeah, that's what gear
this.
score is.
Yes. Yeah, more or less, exactly. Like I hate, like, I mean, I hate item level in the sense that I hate grinding and like farming to keep up with content. But because all the content in Guild Wars 2 is just level 80 content, blank, I think you can just have a minimum requirement that it's all exotic gear, and the game should just yell at you and tell you that. They should just yell at, just say to you, you need full exotic gear. You literally cannot queue until you have full exotic gear.
No, I
runes.
wouldn't put it. I think I know what you're saying, but just to maybe nitpick, I guess,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
it has to be level 80 exotic gear, right? Because
Correct,
otherwise you have
yeah,
people
yeah,
going
yeah.
in with level 67 gear that doesn't have the stats.
Correct. I feel like Guild Wars 2 doesn't have enough, weirdly enough, it doesn't have enough gating. So you get
Yes, agreed.
groups where it's like complete,
Mm.
yeah, as you said, like full dire gear and then full experienced players. And something like, I know people hate agony resistance in fractals, but if you go into a tier 4 fractal group, at the very minimum, you know that group has full ascended gear, and there's already like it's already implied that they know the game enough to have to like go and earn that in the first place. So if raids and strikes had something like that, you just going in there and knowing that everyone has level 80 exotic gear, they've got runes, I think that's like enough to get through the content for sure. And I don't think it's an issue either to have some content match made, some not, because a lot of games do that. A lot of like Destiny as another, like as an example again, earlier game dungeons, the easier ones, there is matchmaking, and then as you climb higher, there's no matchmaking. It's fine. That's just how it works.
What type of win rate do you think would be required in some of these auto-made groups for the system to actually be used? Because you know what? I think it needs to be really high. I reckon it would have to be, for people to use the LFG, I think you would need a 90% win rate of an auto matchmaker. I think any lower than 90%, I think people would start using it.
Well, for content like tier 1 fractals, there is no fail state. You can literally endlessly respawn and throw your head at the boss. So you can't fail level 1 fractals,
and
or level 4 fractals for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if you could matchmake into the emboldened raid wing for the week. Just that one.
It's tricky. It is tricky because you don't. Okay, so I've heard that other games, they have sort of a cutoff for where matchmaking exists. For example, like the lower level stuff, there's matchmaking, but the higher level stuff, there isn't. Ooh, it just feels very odd, right? Because the experience in an emboldened raid is actually very different than the raid, but people might conflate them and think, oh, well, you know, if I've done this, then I can just join. You know, I shouldn't be a problem. I should know how to do this other thing. But emboldened actually has some interesting interactions in raids, and so you may not learn some of the mechanics if you do that. And I feel like, okay, I've really there's like no evidence for this, but it just feels bad. Okay, the idea of only putting it in emboldened and then not having it for the regular thing, I feel like it sets a weird expectation. You know, it's like, oh yeah, I can just join these. Well, I guess I won't ever do the other thing because it's too hard to get a group for. I would rather them all have it.
You get confidence. You get confidence after you've done it a bunch of times.
You get a taste, you know, a little tease. And I think that actually is something that, you know, I really like stuff like Freezy, for example. And the reason I even brought up the win rate is because ArenaNet actually gave us stats on this, and I thought it was super interesting. A long time ago on a stream around Winter's Day, they said that if over 5 people get into that instance, the win rate is over 90%. If over 5 people make it in, then it almost certainly dies. And that really got me thinking, because that fight is very... It's pretty easy, right? Obviously, it's a festival content. It's pretty easy. Like, I think that if you had an LFG system for some of the more challenging content, even the emboldened content, and certainly some of the harder Icebrood Saga strike missions,
Yeah.
Oh, I'd be super worried about groups just not being able to clear. Because obviously, when you make something more accessible, you're going to introduce newer players, right? The players that you're going to get by pressing a button that push you into a group are going to be newer and less experienced than players who are going to use the LFG. So that's like one factor already. Yep. Second factor is that you're absolutely right that Guild Wars 2 doesn't have this, hard trinity, but it does have roles. And the Guild Wars 2 meta is heavily defined by supports. And because supports have more responsibility, not as many people play them. And let me tell you, if you go into instance content and you don't have some kind of... It doesn't have to be a perfect support. It doesn't have to be like the meta best in slot hyper omega giga support. But if you go in and you don't have supports, you are going to have a bad time. Like, especially in raids, even if you do happen to have emboldened. Like, maybe you can kind of brute force it with emboldened on some raid wings. Because, you just, like... You take no damage, right? You're basically God in some of those raids with like max stacks of emboldened. But I do think that we should be very careful when talking about this and not say, it's fine. Just take 10 random people, right, and throw them into like a raid. I think that could be a little bit spicy. I can certainly see it being pretty okay with certain configurations and certain raid bosses with emboldened on. But there are going to be some groups that just don't work. And I'd actually be worried about the percentage of groups that just don't really work, in a lot of these situations. Because in my opinion, for a system like this to be viable, I think that ArenaNet need to have a number that says, okay, if we take 10 totally random players and hit them on Veil Guardian emboldened mode, it will die 90% of the time. I think they need a number that says that. Otherwise, I do think the system will essentially just dissolve and fizzle. We kind of saw this, of course, with the strike mission public system. Now, to be clear, and DRMs as well, by the way, those systems are deeply flawed, so I can't put it down to just fail states, right? I'm not going to do that. Just to briefly clarify on this, there are weird instances you can't recruit more people if people leave, which is really weird. You can't leave the instance properly as well after it's done, right? It's a bizarre, weird, finicky system, and that obviously contributes, but I will also say this. Realistically, there are definitely times where if you join one of these groups through the public LFG, you will just get stuck there, right? And you probably won't be able to clear it sometimes, especially on some of the, I think some of the more challenging Dragon response missions like Caldon Forest. I get that's a bit of a nightmare with like 5 random people, because there's one other thing we didn't talk about. I'm getting it all in here in my my epic monologue. Yep. It's true that Guild Wars 2 is a bit role like Trinity agnostic. It is not role agnostic. You need someone who's going to tank sometimes, quite a lot of the time, right? You need someone who's going to be able to do X mechanic, Y mechanic in a multitude of different encounters, right? If you don't have that, then you are going to have a little bit of trouble, right, as well. There are a lot of variables that go into whether a group is going to end up being successful or not, and funnily enough, kind of like the relatively high base difficulty can be a little bit punishing in that regard sometimes. So again, I'd be down to try it, because honestly, it sounds like content, but I'd be very worried that it would die.
I think it's just a value proposition. Like, do you think people failing at a raid is going to turn away more people than it gets into raids, or no? And I don't think they all need to have like 90%. I don't think it is a strict flat line. Even in other games that have matchmaking, not every encounter is easy. I know that like right now in WoW, like LFR Razageth or whatever is a massive pub stomper, and that's okay. I don't think it's a huge issue, because then they just go and do the other content instead. Like, it's not, I don't know.
Yeah, to clarify what I said earlier, I think the experience of stuff like Emboldened is much different, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have matchmaking with those things. I think more people rating, even if they're failing, is better. More people at least putting in the attempt, getting exposure to the content, that's a net positive. My concern with what you just said, Bloom, like if people failing and or people going in and maybe they're winning, but they're just kind of brute forcing it, is it makes the expectations of the content kind of strange. I think even what you said, Teapot, saying, oh, something needs to have a 90% win rate, that's just a weird concept to me. Like that, because what you're saying is like everybody goes to class and everyone gets an A. That's a weird. I don't know.
Yeah, welcome to modern. Welcome to
mean,
modern gaming. Welcome to modern gaming. Yeah, and look.
I mean, I guess that's fine.
I'm not really like even passing judgment on this. This is what people expect. This is the way people engage with games. In current year, with a few exceptions, right? Unless you're playing like some Souls game, right? People do not expect to lose. People expect to win.
Yeah, this is why I think, Bloom, I think it would be a struggle, right? Like if you throw people in there and they're failing and failing and failing, I think they'll just stop because they'll go, oh, well, I can go somewhere where I'm not failing. And frankly, sometimes I do that too. I think we all do that, right? We're like, okay, I've died to Kadeem 1 a bunch of times. I've spent 40 minutes here. I'm kind of burnt out on this. I'm going to go do something else. But if you're doing that at even the beginning levels, right? If you're doing it at what is to be perceived as the easiest level of rating, what kind of message are we sending to these players who then might want to, they're thinking, oh my gosh, I can't even do the easiest level. Holy crap, I guess I'm just not good. And then they'll feel discouraged. They don't know what's wrong. They can't decipher what's wrong. And then they won't want to move on. That's actually my biggest concern, is that if you throw people in and they're failing a lot, they're going to think it's much harder than it actually is. And I wouldn't blame them. They just don't understand why it's harder.
I don't know. I kind of push back on that idea because I just think that, I mean, I play with a lot of new players. I tend to play with a lot of new players. But I think that in this day and age, you're right, Teapot, that people expect success. But I think, especially in the MMO scene, with the initial success of like New World and the success of Elden Ring and stuff, I don't think people are that afraid of challenge and failing over again, especially with the sort of the like age demographic of Guild Wars 2. I don't think it's as much of an issue as we're painting it to be. And I think we as like experienced players tend to like project our ideas with like how failure feels on these new players. I think a lot of new players don't care. They just want to get into the content. To be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. You know, I think that it's very difficult to make like, oh yeah, everyone feels this way, right? But I do, yeah, that's obviously, you know, like, you know, a statement that doesn't make any sense, right? But I do think that in general, what people are looking for in gaming has changed, right? And expectations that players have changed. And also expectations have been set by the game, right, too. In Guild Wars 2, you very rarely encounter any kind of pushback. And hey, you know, that there's something to be said for that, right? It means that you don't have to worry about getting absolutely deleted and not being able to get your loot, right? Like in a video game. You know, there's something to be said for that. But realistically, that's just not the way the game is set up. Like, meta events are meant to be borderline unfailable, right? That's the way they're designed, right? Like, they don't fail, essentially. It's only when you get to instance content, which is where you kind of start to introduce more of a fail state concept. And I think that, I think that not everyone likes that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could also start with like dungeons or something, right? Like you can just send a bunch of randoms into dungeons. They'll clear it eventually, right? Like, and if
I think that would be really good
with matchmaking and they were compulsory in the story. I know this is a hot take, but like I think if they were compulsory in the story and they had matchmaking and you could just queue into it, that would introduce a lot of people to that idea of failing and stuff. I don't think it necessarily, like this difficulty needs to be introduced in the open world if you've got intermediary content like dungeons to break it up to, show you how to fail and how to start again,
Okay, I don't know why I'm like bursting with excitement about this, but for some reason I actually think it's a super good idea to do the stat thing. If you had a minimum stat requirement for all content, what you could do is you could say, okay, I want to queue as a, and again, I know this is going to be perfect, but you could say, I want to queue as an alacrity. And if you do that, it looks at your stats and it says you have to have a minimum amount of concentration.
Exactly. That was my exact thought. Yeah, if you could queue for roles by having like a minimum healing power if you're a healer, minimum power.
Yeah,
for
of course, it's not going to be perfect, but it would be much better, right? Like,
I think
it would be
enough.
much better.
I think there's a floor that you can reach where all content is you get a 80% win rate from this like minimum requirement of having these minimum stats.
I'd be down to try it. I mean, like, I don't know. It would be super difficult. Like, I mean, role select, and I'd be down to try it. Normally I would say, this will be an absolute disaster. But you've kind of sold me, Bloom. I'm kind of getting into it. I feel like I need Nike to yell at us and say how wrong we are at this point, but you're convincing me. You're selling me on it. You're salesman Bloom over here. And I kind of like it. There was, and I think you could be a little bit clever as well. You could look at your build and it could see what boons you could apply and then make some kind of heuristic maybe if you wanted to be a little bit clever about it, right?
It's not doing any of this shit.
Yep.
There's no way they have the resources to even add. So the basic thing that they would have to add is a little box on the UI that you check next to what role you are. They can't do that. Adding those checkboxes is outside the scope of what the studio is capable of producing and a UI change. So that's it. It's nice. I would love it if they had like a very robust queuing system where you could like put down what build you are and it knew how to match people up. Great, let's do it. But ArenaNet's not doing that. It's just not happening.
Wow.
I mean,
but what if they did?
Yeah. He's out of line, but he's right. I sort of agree. I can't see this happening anytime soon, but I love to plant this idea and like push this idea into ArenaNet's heads so they can at least think about it. They've probably already thought about it, but I don't know. I think it's an interesting discussion point, and I want ArenaNet to be more aware of it. That we want something like this.
Yeah, let's also push back the next season of Living Story and just do like a total revamp of. We could do like a season 2 revamp, so that season 2 gets brought up to standard, and you can like bundle in a bunch of quality of life stuff. That'll tide the game over for another year and a half. Perfect.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other. This is another thing. Is I feel like we don't have this progression culture or whatever because we don't get frequent enough content to try new groups in. Like it's the idea of doing a progression group for content that is like 6 years old is weird. And people aren't doing that because most people are already, accustomed to that content. But if there was a more consistent schedule, if you had like a new fight every 3 months or something, you might actually build some sort of community around that. I don't actually know. I'm curious to know what it was like in the Heart of Thorns, Path of Fire era, because I wasn't raiding at that point. And like, what was the community like when there was consistent raid updates? Were there groups just running in blind, or was it just how it is now, where it's sort of like straight away there's a bunch of experienced groups and then that's it,
I think
how was that?
Critical mass is a thing here as well, because it was a free-for-all, right? Like people were just kind of zerging it down, for sure, right? Everyone was just going crazy. And
sounds like fun.
Well, and this is where things get real. This is where things get really complicated, because there actually is something to be said for what is the way to describe this phenomenon. There are loads of people who have no experience, and everyone who has raided previously has slowly got more and more experience, and the distance between those two groups has increased over time. And the reason for
You do
that
not
is
have a normal distribution.
you don't have
Okay.
you don't have this nice curve of loads of people at the start, and then you have this kind of big clump in the middle of everyone who's kind of halfway there and middling experience, and then you have a smaller amount of people who have super ultra omega experience. No, it's basically nobody's in the fucking middle, right? Loads of people at the top, right, who have been there, done that, and loads of people who've got absolutely nothing. And this is entirely because of the fact that there isn't enough new content to fuel this, right? The scenes, any kind of like progression scene or end game scene, I would say this actually applies to any challenging content, PvP, World vs. World, etc. You need to have like they're almost like pyramid schemes. You need to have constant push, otherwise it kind of collapses under its own weight, pretty much. The gateway, the pathway collapses, and there really is something to be said for this, because it's a lot harder to get groups that are progressing, because so many people have already done that, and a lot of people haven't, and there aren't enough people kind of funneling in to really sustain it. So there really is something to be said for this idea that it's quite weird to have this consistent scene of progression without lots of new content to sustain it. And funnily enough, you can really see the other end of this with Harvest Temple Challenge Mode. Harvest Temple Challenge Mode has seriously done more for endgame content than I think almost any update the game has ever had, because all of a sudden it spawned this massive progression culture around it, and there are loads of groups going for it that have then spilled over into other areas of the game, such as raiding, for example, and are more into that progression mindset as well. Like, it's very, very obvious, but yeah, adding more content would massively help the LFG, because it's very much like a reset for everyone. So, for example, if you release Wing 8, all of the, the players who are up here, right, in a way they get reset a bit, because they don't have any experience in Wing 8, because nobody has any experience in Wing 8. So it acts as like an entry point. Every new raid, every new strike mission is an entry point into group content, because it resets everyone, because you don't have any experience. You still have, your basic mechanics, you have your, you can press your buttons and so on, right? But ultimately, you don't have to be in a raid to practice pressing your buttons, right? You can go and do that in open world, in PvP, or whatever you're doing, right? You can kind of get that experience anywhere, but you can only get raid experience for that specific raid within that specific raid, right? So when everyone gets reset to no experience, this is amazing for the LFG. It is amazing for players making that first step.
Yeah, 100%. Like, oh, go ahead, Nike.
I was gonna say, it's interesting that the only thing that makes it even close to still doable is power creep. Like, if we were still at the power level of like Wing 1 launch, like, it would be impossible right now for people to break into like fighting Doom. Like, people would have like no chance of Doom CM. But like, it's power creeped enough that if you're new, you can still get through with perseverance and like break into the end and break into like the general experience raid scene. But it's kind of being held together by that power creep.
Yeah, to Nike's point earlier about like ArenaNet not being able to make UI changes and do these massive overhauls to matchmaking and LFG and that sort of thing. I think there is an avenue here for them to like to really promote that progression culture by just keeping up consistent content, like with new content releases. Like the other day I saw an Old Lions Court CM progression group just on the LFG. And I think the problem was that strike came way too late after End of Dragons to keep up that momentum. But I'd be really interested to see how it'd go if they had like a new strike every 3 months. Yeah, I also don't know how to feel about challenge modes coming weeks after. I don't know, because I like with Old Lions Court, this is purely anecdotal, but like I played the normal mode, and by the time the challenge mode came around, I was like, I've already done the normal mode. I've experienced the content. There's like an extra 2 to 4 gold. I think it's 2 gold, extra 2 gold for doing the challenge mode, and I've already sort of checked out. Whereas if there was a challenge mode on day one, I think you'd have these interesting races where people are really racing the challenge modes completely blind. And it might be interesting. I don't know. I don't know how you feel about that.
I think the concern would actually be bugs, to be honest. I
Yeah.
think that's a big reason why they're doing this, because they want to preserve the integrity of these challenge modes, and that's why I think it makes sense to delay them a little bit. I definitely get what you mean. Like, for example, oh man, one of the really big reasons why Harvest Temple CM took such a long time to clear was because not even a single guild cared about the normal mode, even a tiny bit. Nobody knew how it worked. Right? No guild knew the mechanics of normal or like the intricacies of it. Like everyone was basically learning the entire fight from scratch on challenge mode. That wasn't the case with Old Lions Court CM. Old Lions Court CM looked way easier than it actually is. Right? Because you can actually, Old Lions Court CM is actually a bit of a challenge. It definitely is a bit of a pug slayer, right? 100%. It's not easy. But a lot of guilds that were going for Worlds First one-tapped it. Why? Well, I'll tell you why, because I'll tell you what I did with my guild. We did a bunch of, a huge amount of, well, not a huge amount, not as much as I wanted, actually. We did a bunch of grinding. We actually made a bunch of comp theory crafts, strategy theory craft. We knew exactly what we were going to do going into it, how to handle every single mechanic. We were speculating about what might change. And we were right about some things and wrong about other things. But we went in with a rock-solid understanding of exactly how it works and exactly what we were going to do. And that obliterated the difficulty of Old Lions Court CM. So that's, yeah. Yeah, we were playing naked with no gear on whatsoever to reduce our damage output in case of a DPS check. And also so we'd take, like, triple damage as well. But, yeah. Yes, there you go. That's kind of a fun meme, though.
Yeah, this is okay. So we talk about this progression culture and wanting that. So I would argue, with some humility here, though,
Okay.
that Scan Gang is probably the largest guild on NA that makes static groups, very specifically. So I feel like I have some knowledge of, you know, people making groups and how many people are wanting those groups, etc.
Yeah.
I have not beaten OLC CM.
Okay.
Why? Because the effort to find people to beat that challenge mode is too high for me. Now, it might not be that high for others. Maybe other people have different connections, but to find a group that can take that on, that has the experience and everything to do it, it just takes too much time and too much effort. That's a problem, I think.
Yeah. Do you think you would have done it on day one? If it came out,
I wasn't available on day one, and so after I actually knew, I was like, crap, I got to work that day, and I'm really busy that week. I'm not getting it done. That was literally my thought process. I knew that I was never going to be able to do it once the majority of players that do that kind of content had already cleared it one time.
Well, you could fake it till you make it. I mean, you could.
Well, no, I mean, I could go in and like ask somebody that and try to.
No. You just join an Old Lions Court CM group in the LFG, and you kill it. There are, well, maybe on NA there isn't, but I see them on EU all the time.
There are not any on, and I've never seen them on NA.
Okay, well, you can do it on EU, but what I'm getting at is you just kill it 4 times with pretending like you know what you're doing, and then you start to learn the mechanics, and then now you figured it out. I don't know if you need to blind prog it with like 10 other blind proggers. You just do what we always tell noobs: fake it, pretend like you know what you're doing, watch a guide.
To be clear, don't pretend. Actually know, right? Look at the guides, understand them.
I don't mean go in there blind. I mean watch a guide, know how to play your class. Just get into a group, especially if you're just like DPS. You just follow the DPS around and do what they do.
Everyone in the comments is like, "Oh my gosh, Sneb is so wrong." I'm in the Strike LFG right now. There are no groups.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a Sunday. I'm in the Raid LFG. There is one group.
Okay.
I could sit there and wait for one, or I could go around and try to find people that are doing it. But
Why don't you tag
point
up
is,
and
it's
start
not
the
that
group
Well,
yourself?
to be fair,
it's that it's
Dude,
hard,
reverse
right? It's that
cards.
if I have a small amount of time to play, looking for a group and setting up that group is not how I want to spend the first 45 minutes of
I mean,
my
is
2
it
hours.
different than like forming a Doom CM group? Like, let's say you just had the itch to do Doom CM.
Yeah,
like,
this is a
it really-
challenge mode. This is a challenge mode. To be fair, it is definitely on the higher end of content. Like, yeah,
And it's
to
'cause
be
it's
honest,
newer, to be
there
fair, as
are
well.
there
Not
are
many people figured it out.
there are probably a lot of people staring at the LFG right now, waiting for someone to make a group. Like, this is the standard meme, and it's 100% true. Right now, there are 50 people saying the LFG is dead, this is fucked up, and not even one of them is pressing the advertiser group button, right? Okay, like that is happening right now.
They
which I
need
guess-
a little viewer count thing. In
Yeah,
the LFG to see how
that would
many
be
people are
that would be
viewing that.
super
So
interesting.
good.
Yeah.
Huge.
How many people are actually watching right now? That would be fascinating. It might even be higher than we might expect. Actually, I bet it's a really high number, to be honest.
My other pipe dreams for the LFG is like being able to pin a little one of the LFG tabs to the side, so you can just go on about your day and watch groups there to see if you want to join a random one. And the other one is I don't think we need this many tabs in the LFG.
Oh,
I think we
please,
need like
yes.
I think we need like literally like 4 tabs maybe. Because sometimes I just want to do some random bit of content, but I'm not gonna go through and open up every single little one. And I might be a minute too early and not see the group and then close the LFG and I'll never even
I
use
just
the
had
thing
a
either.
crazy idea. What if they had a thing where you could just put like random, and you could just like click a button and join a random group for any content? That'd be so fun.
Surprise
Like,
me.
imagine. Yeah.
all of a sudden
surprise
you're
me.
doing
Go ahead.
like one of those like open world jumping puzzle dungeon things, like the whatchamacallit guy's lab or whatever. Like suddenly you're in a group for that. That would be.
I mean, we laugh, but I think like decision paralysis is a massive issue in Guild Wars 2. Like, there's so much content that's parallel to one another that sometimes you just don't know what to do and you don't do any of it. I would love some way to just see everything going on in Guild Wars 2 currently and just pick one. I don't know. No.
Yeah.
I like the idea of I don't know what content I want to play, but I want to play something, and you just click a button, and suddenly you're in a dungeon, and then you click the button again, and now you're doing a raid. You click the button again.
I press the button. I press the button, and I end up in one of these horrible groups clogging up the LFG, Sneb. That's where I end up.
You don't even need to press the button.
Yeah, you press the button and you end up in Sneb's
Guild. Yeah. And I end up in like an erotic roleplay group or a selling group. And then they try and sell me a raid. They think I'm a buyer. That's what happens, Sneb. Disaster.
But in all seriousness, the LFG has way too many tabs, and it is mentally destroying me every day. I open it, and I'm like, holy crap, I don't. And did you know there's actually like a psychological thing at play here? If you have too many choices, you're actually more likely to pick none of them.
Yeah.
It's a really big problem. So when there's all of these, some people open that thing up and they're like, that's too overwhelming. I know people might be rolling their eyes and thinking, oh, that can't be true. But it is. There's a feeling of overwhelm. If you were to go and try to buy a t-shirt and you had the ability to pick 72 different colors, you might not be able to decide. You get stuck in indecision, and so you just pick none of them. Yeah.
I think this is a massive problem in Guild Wars 2. I have it all the time. I feel like most nights these days, I log in. If I've done the weekly if I haven't done the weekly strikes, I'll do that. But if I have, I cannot figure out what I want to do. And I mean, even me as someone who's in Discords and knows where the event timers are online and stuff, even then I have decision paralysis. I have no idea what to do. But imagine people that don't go to these like event timer sites. They have no idea what to do and they get stuck. And I think this is maybe the number one cause of like all the friends that I used to play Guild Wars 2 quitting. They just cannot decide what to do when they're at max level. Whereas, I don't know, if I opened up an instance PvE tab and I see all the fractals, all the raids, strikes, all those groups, I don't know, I might be more incentivized to like just join one. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I think one mistake that we make as a community is we often heavily criticize the LFG, but we don't talk much about how we would fix it. I would cull tabs. I'd make it so that it's really, really streamlined, that there's not too many tabs. How exactly I'd do that? I might be like instanced PvE or 5-person PvE, 10-person PvE, open world PvE. And then within those tabs, I'd have tags. So you could filter the tags if you wanted to, or you could see it all at once. But if you're like, oh, too many decisions, I'm interested only in fractals and raids right now, then it would only show those groups that have those tags. And in that way, it would be right now when you open the LFG, the game appears dead. I'm just gonna bite the bullet and say it. The game looks dead because there's so many tabs and you're clicking and there's one thing in each tab. You can argue that those are filling quickly. That's fine. That's great. I think it's cool that they fill quickly, but it doesn't matter. It still is perceived as there's nothing going on. So if the groups fill quickly, great, but put them all in one spot so that people can see that those groups are all filling quickly.
Yeah. And I just love to see them while playing because, like, as you say, I think there's this idea that they're filling very quickly, but you wouldn't really know it by opening it up and like staring at it for 15 seconds and then closing it again. I think you'd only realize that by having it literally like locked to somewhere on your screen so you can just keep playing the game while these groups fill in and out. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that
it's
when we're talking about the LFG and things we could change about it, as Nike kind of mentioned with the checkbox, it's definitely a little. I think we've got to be quite conservative with what we talk about. But there's one element of this that I think we've been kind of talking around the edges of, and I really just want to hit it on the head right now. Let's talk about Discord culture, right? And using off-platform features to actually organize groups and organize communities, because to be honest, the LFG having lots of sections makes the game look dead, but I'm not gonna lie, the way people find groups, there are probably way more groups that get made off-platform than on-platform at this point, right? Which also makes the game look a little bit more dead. But I actually think it's really important to analyze why that's happening, right? It's happening, in my opinion, for two reasons. One, we're in this really weird spot where in-game social features are almost always far inferior to off-platform tools, which is fascinating to me. It's so interesting. This is like a modern development in technology, right? Discord, I'm sorry, it's better than in-game systems. And this is not Guild Wars 2, by the way. I would actually say this is true of all MMOs. I can't think of a single MMO where I would ever use the inbuilt social tools. Ever. Not in a million years. That's not going to happen. But secondly, and this, I think, is more of a Guild Wars 2 problem. The Guild Wars 2 LFG does not give the user control. We talked about this right at the start, right? About leadership and stepping up and how there is responsibility there. Here, in my opinion, and I might get roasted in the comments for this. I hate to say this. I do. But if you take responsibility, I think that there needs to be a trade there. There needs to be a degree of control and power that the user has by stepping up and taking that responsibility. That means that that user must have the right to set requirements. That user must have the right to decide what they want, if they want to decide that, of course, right? And how they want to actually approach that content. The Guild Wars 2 LFG, and to be frank, the Guild Wars 2 systems in general, do not facilitate this. And I know that, Sneb, you've experienced a lot of frustration with this. I definitely have with the LFG. This lack of control that you have over expectations and like who can join the group and the type of group that you're going to end up with, it's unbelievably frustrating. And you know what? Here's the real kicker. Discord does let you do this. In my Discord, I enforce rules. If people are toxic or act up, right, or just, outright lie about their experience level in my Discord, I ban them. I don't have to deal with them anymore. That doesn't happen in Guild Wars 2. You'll get hit over and over and over again by stuff like this, and it's incredibly frustrating. And there's nothing you can do about it either, right? Whereas on off-platform stuff, I can actually just moderate my community any way I see fit, right? And to be clear, we actually have a totally open community. We don't even have, you're actually not allowed to ask for kill proof on Hardstuck Discord. But, funnily enough, we've actually managed to foster a decent culture, at least. It's a very open community, so it's not perfect. We've managed to foster a very decent community of trust where people respect each other, and if you don't respect, other people and respect their time and are willing to put effort in and, actually listen to what people are saying and look at those requirements, we get rid of you. And this is a colossal advantage that off-platform tools have, because it gives you that power and responsibility Spider-Man trade-off, right? Because otherwise, if you have all of the responsibility, but you get nothing out of it, no way to actually set standards, that's a very unappealing trade to use the in-game systems, right? And it just leads to a huge amount of burnout in people who organize groups. And honestly, to be frank, regrettably, a lot of players simply abusing players who are willing to step up and take responsibility.
Yes, it is a big issue. I think I get memed on quite a lot because people say, well, you creating all these statics removes people from the LFG. And, people might not like this response, but it actually adds people to the LFG. These are usually they're people that will never, they never would have got into raids because they could never get a group before or whatever. And now they build up the confidence so they can get in there, right? They just don't. People prefer to play with people who have similar goals and mindsets. And the LFG doesn't facilitate that in any way. You have to set it yourself, but there's kind of this weird cultural issue where people think, well, if you ask for anything, then, people are mad that you're doing that because they think it's unnecessary or toxic. You might recall that earlier in the podcast here, I said something like, it just doesn't matter. There are certain things that, you don't even really need. It doesn't have to be perfect to get the kill. The problem is, that can be true, but it can also be true that people want a more perfect run. They enjoy actually going and optimizing things and being competitive with themselves and having, a really solid foundation when they go to do these activities. And it's not wrong for them to want to play a certain way and to have certain expectations. I think if there's mutual respect between both of these camps, that's fine. And if people are willing to just be really honest with their own expectations and not be rude about it, then I don't ever foresee that as being an issue. But the problem is that is really too idealistic. That doesn't happen. And, you have a lot of people that get frustrated with each other. And so that's why people go to Discords, is they don't want people judging them for having requirements. But that just puts out all of these people that don't know that these Discords exist. It becomes this sort of secret community. And I think that's a huge shame.
That's for sure.
How do we fix that?
Whatever.
Wait, what do you mean good? Wait, what do you mean?
I mean, the people that are like, the people that don't want to use Discord ever, like there's people, I see them on Reddit. They're like, I will never use a third-party program to play a game. Those are boomers with one monitor who have to alt tab in order to go to Discord. Of course they don't want to use it. Whatever. If you refuse to, if you're like, look, I've got a horse and buggy. I like my horse and buggy. I'm never going to get a car. It's not happening. That's it. You just got to let the old people sit on the porch telling stories about the old days, and let them do their thing and just ignore them, and society moves on.
Well, I mean, but the thing is, come on. I obviously you're memeing a little bit.
Everyone under 25 is fine with Discord. It's
a bit weird though, isn't it? That third-party software is so ingrained into using games and playing games and getting into content. That's a bit weird, don't you think?
I think it's a failure on the game's part. It
absolutely is. Yeah.
We have the same problem. I mean, across all gaming, really. You talk about people who love Halo. Like I used to love Halo. You used to meet people all the time in public matches, but now everyone's branched off into their Discords and no one talks to each other because you don't need to. So all I'm saying is Guild Wars 2 should have open mic.
Yeah, we should
chat,
go back to the old
proximity
Okay,
days of
I
Halo
love that.
banter.
That's
Let's go back to the old days of
yeah.
Halo banter on the.
Yeah.
That was good.
Oh boy.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Learning new
know, it
curse
might
words
be-
from 12-year-olds. Like that's the way to go.
It might come off as kind of odd for me to say this, but I mean, I have quite a decent Discord community for the statics and everything, but I actually don't like that it has to be that way. I think it's cool that we can have these external communities, but one thing that I struggle with is I always feel like I'm excluding someone, because if they don't know about that, then they're going to go and be like, I have no idea how to find a team. And I mean, you can just say, oh, well, whatever, who cares? But it kind of sucks that people struggle so much to find groups and do progression and get into this content when the content is really, really good. But if you spend half your playing time trying to desperately get a group together, and then after the first poll, 2 people leave because it doesn't go perfectly, that sucks. That's not a good time. And I feel like that's pretty easy to empathize with, no?
Yeah, for sure. In my opinion, the way you tackle this is that you don't try to fight it. You actually do the opposite. You embrace it. Because realistically, there is absolutely no way that Guild Wars 2 will ever make their social systems in game as good as Discord. No game will ever be able to do it. It's just not going to happen. I think the only thing you can do here is basically make community advertisement like a guild billboard, or like proper guild advertisement system in game. Like, and I think ArenaNet have got to do that. And you know what? I'd say it's actually extremely important. And you know what? I'm going to do some marketing here as well. I'm going to do some salesmanship. I think it's very much in Guild Wars 2 and ArenaNet's interest to actually look at the system, because I guarantee you that players who join at least one guild probably retain better, right? And therefore play more and therefore spend more, right? Boom. There it is. I think this is just a target, like some kind of place where a guild leader can post an advert to their guild, to their community, maybe allow, obviously you'll be able to, post a description that would include a Discord link, for example, where users could then join to basically reduce that opacity, because Discord is not going anywhere. Nike, this is where I'm going to side with Nike. Realistically, as much as I hate to say it, this is a little bit of you kind of have to get with the times a little bit. You got to play the game. That is just the way it is. I'm not a huge fan of it. I actually really sympathize with the idea of wanting to have everything in game. I'm on board with that. But realistically, it doesn't. I don't know. It's hard to say something like this because it feels really harsh, but it just doesn't really work that way, right? I
have a bit of an open question.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Are there other games that officially endorse Discord? Like, they have an official Discord server for the game where people can just go and find groups, and it's moderated by a community manager or anything like that? Because that's my initial reaction is, what if we had something like that, an official server where people could go, and then it's like, okay, well, you just embrace the fact that people are using these external resources. You advertise them in the game and make it very clear that that's where people are grouping up. And then then they don't have to put all the dev time into fixing the LFG.
I think Destiny 2 has one. I think Final Fantasy as well has like an official Discord. Was there not a Guild Wars 2 one? I swear
there's a Reddit one that purports to be the official. They like make themselves you have to really look closely at the Reddit Discord to be like, wait, this isn't an official Guild Wars 2 Discord. Like, they brand it as if it sort of is.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's not official. There's no like official Guild Wars 2 Discord. Because
they're putting all their energy into forums, which is exactly what the modern way of that's exactly how the modern youth are engaging on internet
forums, dude. Yeah, everyone loves that stuff. Yeah. And I actually want to I'm actually going to let Sneb handle this one because he's going to have fun with this. But yes, there is the guild plaza in the LFG, guys. Yes, there is a guild recruitment on the forums. So do you want to go ahead and walk us through why maybe the current systems are a little inadequate right now for advertising your guild?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm in the guild plaza right now. I'm looking at all of these advertisements. Okay. And I can post in there as a party, but not as a squad. If I do this, that's all fine and dandy, but now this puts more pressure on the person who's interested in joining your community. Because they can join, but now they have to mail you or whisper you. They have to put in a little bit more effort rather than exploring. So if I have a Discord or some other website or something for my guild, I actually can't really advertise it because I think it is against the terms of service or something to do that in the actual LFG. But if you put it in your squad message, you're like, hey, like this is our Discord, this is where we're talking, and this is where we meet. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but they don't want your advertising hardstuck.gg in the middle of the thing. So it's really problematic because people then can't just copy paste a Discord link. They can't explore on their own, and you have to be very present there all the time to react to people, or you have to reply to mails. Also, because it's in party, people can join and remove you from the LFG very easily. So, in short, the Guild Plaza is really problematic because people control you. It's really not user friendly, and it's at the bottom of the LFG, and there's already so many tabs. Plus, it's also not specific, right? So if I'm a guild that does something very niche, look, the Skane gang, like I'd welcome everyone, but I don't know why I would be like, oh yeah, join if you never want to do a raid, because we're going to be talking about and doing raids and strike missions. That's what we do, right? It's kind of like saying, oh yeah, I'm going to look for surfers in the desert. There's no ocean there, you know, like, I don't know. It's just a little bit odd. So yeah, I like the idea of being able to go and look for specific kinds of people. I think Guild Plaza is pretty general. That's not the worst criticism. That's honestly a very minor gripe, but it is a bit odd.
I think the biggest problem is that it's just so hidden amongst like 16 other tabs. So this goes into the discussion of like culling down the LFG. If it was like 4 tabs and the guild recruitment tab was like right at the top, I think that would already be like make a huge impact.
Also, it's worth noting with this that if you're posting it right now, if you advertise your guild, you can't do anything else, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yep.
Because you're posting a group advertisement. So in other words, you can't be in a group. And also if you log out, GG.
Yep.
Your advert's gone. Nice. And so this ends up promoting basically semi-AFKing or even like flat out AFKing in order to promote your guild or services, which obviously isn't ideal because 1, you can't do anything, but 2, it means you can't engage with people in any kind of meaningful way, and also it looks a little bit weird because then you have people just having their alt advertising their raid selling guild for like 10 hours a day, right? Which is not good. Right? And also, we didn't even talk about this, by the way, but I'm going to tell you a secret. Absolutely nobody uses like the Guild Plaza, right? Like it's not very popular whatsoever.
There's actually 5 guilds in there right now on NA. I was really surprised. Usually I only see 1 or 2, but again, that's because if you're playing the game, you can't advertise in there. So most people are playing the game.
And look, the forums, by the way, guys, look, we could honestly do a full TeaTime on the forums, but the forums are scuffed.
Oh my god! Okay? Imagine if you got like Optina and some of the real, very well-adjusted people from the forums to join TeaTime. Oh my god, that'd be great. Anyway, I'm gonna give you a cold take on guilds.
Okay, let's do it.
Almost every guild you see recruiting is trash.
What?
And you see it like I'll be like somewhere and I'll see like them spamming map chat and it'll be like 500 members, PVX, we do PvP raids, world v world. It's like you can't possibly do all that at any level that satisfies anyone. Like it's just like the 500 most random people that you could dig up like off the street, like and give it like, and I'm sure no one's repping, no one's talking in guild chat. It's like a 500 person dead guild that does nothing. The guilds that are successful in recruiting are guilds that do things. Like there's a guild that does a meta train on EU at reset every night, Owls, I think. And you know what? They have the squad. It's the same time every day. You can set your watch to it. They go like, hey, if you want to join the guild, here's a link to our Discord. And I am certain that people join that guild based on the fact that they're active and they do something every day at the same time. And they're not trying to like be like, hey, we're also a PvE guild that does PvP, World v World raids, role play, cooking, and movie night. They're not trying to be all things, all people. They're like, hey, we do this one thing that people seem to enjoy. Join our guild. So yeah, the same thing with raids. If you want to recruit for your raid guild, get in the LFG with like 6 decent people and add 4 noobs.
Big.
And be like, at the end of the raid, be like, hey, if you guys had fun tonight, you can join our Discord. Boom. That's how you get people in. Not by advertising that you are like have like a room full of puppies that like they can like come to and you're all things to all people.
It's super funny. That's exactly how I did it in Classic WoW when I went to play that game, actually. I built an entire guild that survived the entirety of Classic WoW all the way through to Naxxramas speedrunning, and that was literally with random people I met pugging Molten Core, right? And I think the culture in that game definitely facilitates that more. In general, people are way more social, in Classic WoW compared to Guild Wars 2 in my experience. Like, much more willing to engage with you in that way through pug groups. But I think it would definitely work in Guild Wars 2 as well. I'm a really big fan of, actually doing kind of on-the-ground outreach, right? I think, funnily enough, that's partially why Mystic Builds did so well. Like, the real old-school, like, full degen Guild Wars 2 raid community that was basically my streak, because I would just pug all day basically, and people would join and slowly kind of blend into the mix. I kind of miss those days. Maybe we've got to bring that back. Maybe I've got to start doing that again, guys. I've got to do like perma pugs all day, right? And we're gonna rebuild raids that way, huh?
Yeah, I mean, on the content front, I feel like you could facilitate this by having like actual new guild missions that happen in newer maps where people are running around. They see like a horde of a whole guild doing some cool thing. I think that really helps with like guild discoverability for sure. We just had nothing, no new guild missions like that in a long time. And if there was also some incentive to like raid with your guild, strikes with the guild, a little something extra, people might be more incentivized to do.
Look at it the way cults recruit, because that's essentially what you're doing. You're a cult. And you do like community events with the cult where you hand out like food and muffins and stuff, and you get people to come by the cult like headquarters. That's how you have to treat it. It's a little dark, but I mean, that's how it works for a reason. And then the next thing you know, people are getting like Teapot logos branded on their bodies. And that's fine too, if that's how it goes.
That's what you want to do. That's what you want to do. Yeah. Okay. I feel we've kind of got some pretty good work done there in regards to the LFG topic. Is there anything obvious that we kind of skipped over or missed out on? I think that was a fairly comprehensive discussion on kind of the topic of group making and the LFG and social structures.
We can get into the really dark side of the LFG.
Wait. Okay. Wait.
Are you ready?
Oh no.
Yeah.
The ERP. No, I'm just kidding. No, people are really upset about raid selling. I think it's important that we actually address that. Okay, so I did some research, right? And by research, I mean I Googled extensively.
Okay. All right.
And because you know what? I hate, raid selling. People are always selling raids. I'm never going to buy a raid sell. I'm never going to sell. That's just not me, okay?
Okay.
I usually just block those ads and move on. However, I had questioned whether or not they were even allowed. I thought they might be illegal. So I did some digging. And they are explicitly allowed. They are explicitly allowed. It literally says raid selling is allowed. Selling services is allowed.
Okay.
So I see a lot of contention on things like the forums and Reddit and social media about these sorts of things. And it's allowed. So we can criticize things like that it's allowed or
That's
whatever.
the final word then.
But Yeah,
Like,
but
no
there's
more debate.
nothing else. There's nothing else to do. People that are saying, "Oh, spam report them" and stuff, it doesn't do anything. All you're doing is sucking up resources. Because the moderation team or whatever, they now just have to look at all these spam reports and be like, "Oh yeah, it's just people reporting raid selling again."
I think it only looks like a problem because, again, like the LFG tab is so segmented, and you open up the raid tab, and it's just raid selling. But if all those raid sells were like super drowned out and few and far between, the strikes and the actual raid and strike fractal groups, I think it wouldn't be as much of an issue. But it's just because it's essentially got its own little tab where people sell it. So
Interesting. I mean,
yeah,
were we going anywhere with this? Sneb,
No,
exactly. Like,
yeah.
did you, were
Oh,
you,
where
were you
was I
kind
going?
of?
Oh, I just
Yeah, I
look.
mean, where
There's
you,
a,
where
there's
you
a lot
going
of
with this?
vitriol about this. I
Yeah.
just think it's kind of silly. Like there's just no. My opinion is I get why people are upset, but there's no reason to put your energy into that because nothing's gonna change. Now you can be mad at me for saying that, but it's in the rules. I'm not saying I agree with the rules. I'm not saying I endorse raid selling. I never have engaged with it ever. But there's nothing we can do about it because it explicitly says that it's allowed. So calling people out by name, you know, saying that people should spam report. I'm sure this happens sometimes. There's just no point. I don't think it's even worth talking about very much on things like social media and the forums and stuff. If you want, I guess you can say, hey, we should advocate for changing the rules, but I just don't think going after the people or going after raid selling in particular really just doesn't do anything. It's just kind of a waste of time.
People just hate the idea of someone else getting something that they don't deserve. Like, that's a natural human sort of emotion, is seeing someone rewarded with something that they didn't earn. You hate it. Everyone hates it. I hate that. But so there's a lot of people that like see people buying, or they know there's people buying raids, and it burns them up that people are getting legendary armor that don't deserve it. And that's where it comes from.
Yeah. And you know what? Here's my take on raid selling. This might be I'm not sure if this is a hot take or not. I like raid selling because it means that players who genuinely have absolutely zero interest in raiding whatsoever and just want to get the rewards can do that. There is a way for people to do that, either by paying for it or getting carried in some kind of raid giveaway. Awesome. Love it. What I don't like, and I think this is maybe what people are picking up on, is that some players like do it out of frustration or like sheer desperation. That is really sad, and that fucking sucks, right? That's really unfortunate.
Hey, I bought KO to get my turtle, and I was desperate. I needed a group to get my turtle for that strike, so I paid. Yep, I paid.
Here's the thing as well.
Like,
Like
a guild leaf. I paid 10,000 gold for that.
Yep.
I needed the turtle.
That guild's legit. They sell HTCM actually. You know, those are juices.
I mean, if you really, the other thing too is it means that if you really love raids, you really love strikes, you can make some proper actual, gold from that. Which, yeah, I don't think that's awful. Just has more people doing raids. So,
yeah.
I don't really have like a big issue with people doing service. Maybe this is just because I played Guild Wars 1 and it was really common to have people do fairies or, running. And so essentially what that is I don't want to play through all of the missions and walk through all of the areas and level up right away. I want somebody to kind of just guide me through and get me there quickly. And you would pay a little bit of gold or whatever. Sometimes people just do it for tips. And that was it, right? I never had an issue with that ever. People would even run through dungeons in Guild Wars 1 and they would just say, hey, pay me at the end, right? I paid to get ran through. The Guild Wars 1 nerds will know. I paid to get ran through Frostmaw Burrows. Does anybody know that? Frostmaw Burrows or whatever it's called?
Oh, yeah, I know.
It's like one of the harder dungeons,
Sneb's confessing.
right? And this is like one of the only, if not the only places that the Silverwing recurve bow would drop from.
Okay.
I was like 13 at the time, or maybe 14. And it was the only time I ever went through the dungeon. I paid to get ran through it. I opened the chest at end. Squire 9 Silverwing recurve bow drops. At the time, that's worth like millions of gold.
You made profit. Nice.
Yeah, it was a good profit for me. I was quite happy about it.
Yeah. I mean, I did it in WoW recently. I just paid someone to help level me up. I sat on a statue and they ran around killing mobs, and I got to max. Easy peasy. It was good. It's a good time.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
What?
It's a real thing. Yeah. In Dragonflight, there was this like little area where you could get massive XP. You just partied up with someone, and they would just go around killing mobs, and you paid them per level.
Oh my god! Imagine if that worked in Guild Wars 2. You could pay the AFK bots to level you.
Oh, yeah. You could pay the AFK farmers to share the loot with you as well.
Yeah.
In some way, you could like do a deal with them, strike a deal with the AFK farmers.
Look, I paid for power level in Guild Wars 1. I'm not gonna lie. I paid
Wait,
for
really?
the run to Draknar's Forge. I'd go,
Oh,
the
shit.
trolls outside. You'd pop
Yeah.
some experience scrolls or whatever, and they'd level you up.
Wow.
I don't know. I don't really have like a huge issue with services. I think what people just don't like is that it's so pervasive, maybe in the LFG, and I can kind of get that. But in my opinion, if something's bothering you, you can just remove it by blocking them.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think one thing that you can do to, I guess, have more wholesome interactions, because let's be honest, raid selling is partially because people want gold, but partially also because people actually really like raiding, and they want to keep doing it, right? And they want to progress their account while only raiding. So if you want to kind of attack raid selling at its core in some sense, or not necessarily attack it, but again, promote more wholesome interactions, then just add stuff like daily raid wing. Right, daily raid, daily, stuff like the daily strikes, right, is pretty good. Hell, you could even do something like daily challenge mode, right, for example, to really incentivize people to kind of repeat those as well, instead of just the additional weekly stuff. Or maybe even like a monthly challenge, but just to nudge people into certain bits of content and make it repeatable. Make the right now, one of the things that really makes me sad about strike missions is that if you repeat a strike mission outside of the weekly quota that you have for EOD, you get literally nothing. You get like a gem that's worth 1 silver or something like that.
You get profit shards.
Yeah.
10 of them.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. I mean, you're usually going to be capped on those anyway, though, right? Just by doing the dailies pretty much. So it's not... Yeah. I don't know. If you want to promote wholesome interactions, then basically give the raid sellers what they want by playing the game the way you want them to play it, right? Like, that's basically the deal. Like, raid players love raids. And again, I don't have numbers on this, but I guarantee this is the case. I guarantee you that the sweatiest players in the game who, like, just will not quit, they can't... Look at Isa. He can't quit, right? He's one of the sweatiest players ever. The players who cannot get out of this game are world versus world players and raiders. Those are the people who stick in this game big time. Probably strikers as well. Like, they're addicted. They can't get out, right? So if you want those players to be useful, then just, make it so that they can farm the raids till their heart's content, and then boom. Which, funnily enough, would also really help with the LFG. But there you go.
It does blow my mind, actually, that, like, ArenaNet have seen probably the success of, like, fractals and how people do them every single day, and you've got LFG groups all the time for fractals running, and they haven't repeated that structure for any of the other content. Just having, daily achievements for each one would be fantastic. It's just wild to me that it's only in fractals, because it's clearly working. And
it's effective though. It is. Yeah, I think funny enough, they're probably a bit. I don't want to doomsay here a little bit, guys, but to be honest, ArenaNet are probably a little bit worried about stuff like fractals, because I mean, fractals are kind of overpowered, to be honest. They probably don't want to introduce more like really overpowered like reward faucets into the game, right? Like, that's probably part of it, to be frank.
Remove some rewards from the fractals.
Well, they removed like
don't do that.
They removed less than 1 gold a day, right? And it was like the biggest post ever, calling for the utter destruction of all Guild Wars 2 developers. So I mean, like, that's probably not going to happen. Or maybe they have to. Maybe they actually have to at some point. It's possible.
Well, it's also interesting that like the economy is deflating. So I don't think that having a gold faucet is the worst idea in the game. Like, maybe we need a little bit more gold faucets in the game. keep those material prices high so that the people that claim that they do all the rewards from materials will be happier.
I have one final thought because I know we're probably looking to wrap up pretty soon.
Yeah.
Just curious about, and this is probably a short thing.
Speak for yourself, Sneb. We're here for the long
We're
haul.
We're here. 12-hour podcast. Let's go. I think one of the reasons that I suggested that tag system before is the LFG has so many acronyms that the community uses that it's basically a different language. And it makes it really inaccessible for players, right? When I go into the raid, like let me just go to one at random here. Let's take a look.
Here we go.
If I go to the raid LFG, it says W5FCSHCM LFG1G2 2HB.
Stings.
That is literally another language. And the reason I actually realized this when, oddly enough, my dad was watching my stream one time. And I was like, "Oh, how did you enjoy the stream, Dad?" And he said, "I didn't understand a single thing you were saying." And then I realized, I was like, "Oh, it's because I was talking about I was like G1, G2, talking about all of these different random things, right?" And he had no idea what was going on. I think this is true for a large part of the community that may be looking at getting into things like, "Oh, I want to join a dungeon." Well, if you go to dungeons, right? Let's take a look. See if I can find one. 0, 0. Okay.
This is any hobby though. Like, go to I don't know, fucking a sailing subreddit and listen to the fucking jargon that people that are into sailing are into. Like, this is just any hobby. I don't think it's
of course.
I don't think it's a big deal.
But that doesn't mean that it has to be this way, right? If you had tags in the LFG, what I'm trying to say is that people can be exposed to this in a different way, right? They can join a group or they can hear about it in their guild or whatever. That's going to just happen. But if the way that they form and look at groups has a whole nother language, that may make it more intimidating to make and join groups. So if there was a tagging system where it said, Wing 1, Veil Guardian, or it said, Wing 2, or, if it extrapolated on that a little bit, I think people would learn those a little bit better and feel less scared to join groups.
Yeah, like World of Warcraft does this. The LFG, when you look into it for mythics or whatever, they have, it shows you what the dungeon name is under all the jargon. Like, you just pick the dungeon and it'll come up in the LFG underneath that post, that listing. I think that'd be something fantastic for guilders too. Yeah. The other thing is you can't even if you're a new player, you don't even know what the wings are or which wing is what raid. Even I forget sometimes because I don't raid that frequently these days. Even I forget which one's wing 5 and I have to go up to the portals and figure out which one's wing 5. It's a mess. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of improvement there. I think that this is where UI changes could be incredibly good. For example, if you're looking for alacrity, you could just say, you could have the little alacrity icon that could appear in your group listing. And it could say, we're looking for this. And then you could mouse over it, and then the user could go, okay, well, they're looking for someone who can apply this boon. Can I apply that boon? That's a good question. Maybe I should have a look. So I think there are definitely some ways to do this. However, I do also agree with Nike to an extent here. I think that we need to minimize jargon, but it's a little bit inevitable. And realistically, we should just be trying to build resources and be more open and welcoming so that players can learn and understand the terminology, understand the lingo, right? It's a bit inevitable that there's going to be, especially when you get to the more advanced content in the game, there's going to be a bit of a language gap there for sure. It's pretty big in Guild Wars 2, and we should obviously try to minimize that, but I don't think eliminating it entirely is fully realistic.
That would never happen.
Yeah.
You just need to try to reduce the barrier to entry. That's all I'm trying to say.
I think what Juan Punch said in chat's correct. If this is the experienced raid tab that we're talking about, then jargon and abbreviations don't matter at all because you're experienced. In the training tab, you should for sure type out kind of at length what you mean. But in the experience tab, it's okay, you're so new, you don't know what a lack is. Well, get out of the experience tab, buddy. No, I don't feel bad for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's a good one actually. It's good that we caught that topic there right at the last second. I think that really is. Is that it for the LFG? I think that is more or less at this point for real this time. I did actually want to do a very quick little bonus topic, actually, just to kind of round things out, because we, of course, did have some news about the balance patch and the preview balance patch. And I don't really want to get into the nitty-gritty, oh, this is getting buffed, that's getting buffed, blah, 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 blah. Things might change. And honestly, I think that's actually a lot less interesting than talking about like the broad design principles. And there is something that I do want to talk about here, and it's a slight concern that I have with the balance patch and kind of the speed at which this is happening. And maybe this is me armchair developing here a little bit, but I'm definitely perceiving, I was expecting quite a lot of design to be attacked with this particular balance patch. And not exactly. You could argue that some of the changes, like mantras being reverted to their previous state where you have to charge them, is a design change. But in my mind, there was a lot of numbers tuning here overall. And that is a little bit of a concern to me, because I think there are some very glaring design issues. I was chatting with Nike about this, and honestly, you know, he wrote me a lot of lines about just talking about all the scuffed things about Berserker, right, for example, and there are just so many other things here as well to go over. I think in particular, the thing that I feel very strongly about is I think support design is very lackluster right now and actually highly problematic. I think, in fact, some of the reasons why people don't play certain builds are because they aren't that much fun to use and are kind of more annoying to use sometimes. Great example of this will be Spectre, where you have to spam wells to give alacrity. It's just not fun. It's just not good. Same thing with Druid, honestly, with Spirits, Revenant with Herald facets, right? Scrapper with gyros. The list kind of goes on here. I am a little bit concerned about this, and I would really like to see ArenaNet tackle these design challenges and design problems a lot, because in my opinion, there is a huge amount of design debt in the game right now that's causing a lot of the gameplay to end up being very not fun, right, and very unengaging, which I perceive to be a very large problem, actually, in the current state of the game.
Fully agree with that. Yeah. I was actually really expecting that very thing in this patch, but maybe it's like too soon. We only just got, I guess, like, it's been 9 months or something. The June patch was when a Ranger and Warrior finally got the alacrity quickness treatment. And yeah, I agree. I really hate that, like, so much of these boons have just been loaded onto just one utility type. I think that's really lazy design, and it's just uninteresting, uninteractive. Ironically, I feel like Condi Quickness Berserker is like the model I would want to see, where there is banners that give quickness, there's quickness on a Warhorn, and there's quickness in a trait. And it means that you could kind of, like, I don't play enough of it, but I feel like that means that you could technically swap out any one of those things to switch up your playstyle, right? Like, you could remove Warhorn and use Torch for extra damage, and as a result, you run like an extra banner. But then, you know, you could, I don't know. I like that kind of synergy, that synergy within one spec over, like, just here's a trait that pops this boon on one utility type, and you end up just using that utility for the boon. And I guess there is a conversation to be had about, like, maybe that's the trade-off. Maybe you're supposed to not have 100% uptime and hold a utility skill and wait to use that at the right moment, you know, when the situation demands it, and maybe that's more effective. But that never feels good, I think, is the most important thing. It never feels good to have to trade, like, opportunity cost just to upkeep this boon because it's so important.
I think that a big problem is the fact that neither Ranger, well, I guess Ranger does, but Warrior specifically doesn't have an elite spec that's designed to be like the quickness role. So they shoehorned it in like wherever they could fit it. And now you have things like Berserker, where the class fantasy of Berserker, especially for a new player, is so far from the reality of what the class is that I would say it's one of the worst current design classes in the game in that regard. Like, the only reason of like Berserker as like a DPS build is complete garbage for a million reasons, but like as like a quickness support, like the idea that anyone would go, I want to play quickness support. Let me go to the Berserker class. That's surely the quickness support class de jour. Like that is just so bad. And they should have just said Warrior doesn't get a quickness support until we make an elite spec designed for it. And hey, if that means that Warrior doesn't have access to quickness, I mean, then it just doesn't. Then it just only can do DPS or whatever else. So
this is why Druid and Spectre and whatnot really annoy me, because I think they have a class fantasy. There's this clear support class fantasy, but for some reason they do the same thing where they just slap it on a utility type, and especially Spectre. I'm like, why even give Spectre a power and like Condi line? It should just be a pure support spec like Druid. You've already got Daredevil and Deadeye for DPS. I don't understand why you would have a third spec that is just like that. Also, it's just a waste of traits, I think. And it comes back to that purity of purpose sort of line that they talked about in that one live stream. Yeah, I feel like specialization should be more specialized and just purely based around one role. I really don't like this design of like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, like I feel like, to go back to Berserker, like the best feeling that Berserker ever had was when it was just like the axe build that spammed decapitate over and over and over again, because that's exactly what Berserker should be. And like this raging guy that smashes his axe as often as he possibly can. And that's what, and so that made sense. And that was an easy build to play, relatively speaking. And so that was like design meeting class fantasy, which is kind of what the goal should be. And that's the problem to echo what you said. If every spec is supposed to be able to do everything, then what's the class fantasy of those specs? Like you really want to have a unique, focused class fantasy to make them feel a lot better. Like, what is the class fantasy of Harbinger exactly? Like,
minions on it.
I mean, whatever they had lying around, right? They just like threw it all in there, right? Like, oh yeah, we could like mix it all together, right? Yeah, it's that's what happened there.
I thought you just put minions on it and allowed the minions to kill everything for you, but
minions.
No. Yeah. I thought that was every necromancer class fantasy, though.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is like a cold take or a hot take or whatever, but like I feel like every spec or every class should just have one spec that is power, one's condi, one's support, and like that's it. Just like hone in on those classes.
I think that's not even far enough. Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I think you're correct there. Sorry, no, I actually just I misinterpreted what you said there. I was about to flame you, but no, I don't have to. Yeah.
No, yeah. I think they should go a bit more strict on like what elite specs are. And I think this helps as well with defining roles in like instance PvE as well. It's just confusing, man. There's like, it's just weird for a new player, you know.
I don't mind that Virtuoso has both Condi and power, but I do like the fact that they are both relatively easy to play, and there's no like random crowbarred in support spec in Virtuoso that is there. So the class just feels like it has a class vision, or it has a class fantasy, and they executed on it and it works. And I think that's why I kind of reference Virtuoso as like one of the better specs in the game in terms of like what that should be like the bar that other specs should meet, where it's like it does this one thing, it does it good, and it's easy to play.
Yeah, like I like Dragon. I actually like Dragon Hunter and Blade Sworn to a degree as well. All their traits are, none of it's like, oh, you can heal on your, I don't know. I just like that they're focused. You know, those are my favorite specs in the game. Same as Druid. I think Druid on balance is quite well designed, where it is all healing, all support. You pick how you want to do that. And I think ideally that's how classes and specs should be moving forward. Just without this like drop the boon on the utility thing. I don't know. You know.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that definitely is important. And I think you're completely correct about this too. I think it's good so that each elite specialization has the thing that it does, right? Like sometimes you can kind of make it work, right? Firebrand, well, That's kind of a funny example, of course. But Firebrand, it makes sense that it could be very versatile. To give a less, perhaps unhinged example, something like Tempest. I feel like Tempest has quite a lot of room to do a lot of different things in that build. Elementalist in general just inherently is quite versatile, so I think it makes sense that Elementalist specializations can do a good chunk of different things, like within an elite specialization. However, I think that having something like Virtuoso, having it focus, it's a ranged damage dealer. Awesome. Love to see it. That's like a really nice design philosophy and fantasy that you can hone in on. Scourge is a damage support hybrid, right? Awesome. Love to see that. That's really cool, I think. And making it so that you can kind of have variance within that fantasy by changing traits, in my opinion, is way better than having one playstyle, but you just do something a little bit differently. This is, I think, is the way I describe Harbinger, is that you can have 3 Harbingers, but they're all identical. It's just that the numbers look a little bit different, and sometimes you pulse boons, right? The elite skill is the microcosm of that, right? It's literally the exact same effect, but the graphic is a tiny bit different, and it does different numbers. Wow, what an incredible choice between 3 Grandmaster traits that change your gameplay in no meaningful way. Wow, so good, right? Yeah. That is the type of design that I think is hell. Whereas I think that, funnily enough, by the way, I think Scourge is a really cool example of this, choosing between like Big Shade, more torment damage, and the Boon Steel stuff. Funnily enough, even though Scourge is indeed putrid design, I do think it is rather good. Funnily enough, I think Path of Fire did this pretty well. Another example of this will be Mirage, I think, has some pretty cool trait choices that actually really mix up your gameplay with the way that you can go about playing it. And Firebrand too, by the way. Oh, yeah. Now, of course, you've got to be a little bit careful. And to be clear, I actually don't think that... I think you could have made really interesting... You can make really interesting trait choices without something being, like, completely disgustingly broken, right? Or, like, designed in a pretty insanely busted way. Are there any good examples from EOD? Funnily, I was going to say Mac, but, well, yeah.
I think the Vindicator traits are all right in that, like, I like the Grandmaster traits in that, like, none of them really greatly change your role, I guess. They're all just different, like, I don't know. Yeah, I think the Vindicator is okay. It's very clearly, like, a power DPS thing, but I didn't like that they had to shoehorn in this sort of, like, off-heal thing. And
yeah, that didn't work, especially when Korev lost Alacrity, right? It's like,
yeah. I think Blade Sworn is my favorite of Ender Dragons in terms of like the traits and whatnot. I don't know. I think the class fantasy is quite focused on Blade Sworn.
Yeah, and Blade Sworn feels different than any other spec in the game. Like the Dragon Slash, like as big of a nightmare as it has been for balance at times because of being able to burst damage so hard. That's a thing that that's a design space they've never done before. And so I think it's successful in that regard, that it has such a unique feel.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think like you said, design debt, when HRT came out, they needed the specs to be a bit more generalist, because if you got
there's only one, right? You could get screwed.
You only had one, and if you didn't like it or it wasn't good, then it was like, okay, you got to wait till the next X Pack, which we're not going to announce for 4 years. So they had to make them a bit more rounded, well-rounded. But now they would have to go back and sort of sharpen them and hone them, and that seems to be a big obstacle, from their dev and time investment. But
I feel like they're working on it. They must be working on it in the background to like rework how boons are given out and stuff. But I would love to see a full like class fantasy pass where all the traits get revamped and they really just one by one focus on each elite spec, and they're like, what is this elite spec's fantasy? Eliminate the traits that don't aid that fantasy in any way. Make them do something different.
Yeah, I would love to see this. I mean, this is probably like the most insane cope ever. I would love to see very regular updates to numbers, like extremely frequently, because I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. You could add 3k DPS to Reaper. And actually, quick thing here, guys. I would look. people are saying that, oh, you know, Reaper can't have more damage because of Shroud. I actually don't think that's the case. Look at the defensives that are available to most DPS classes these days. Holy shit, guys, right? Virtuoso exists. Mech exists. Hollow exists. Like, all of these ridiculous builds. Scourge
Defense
exists.
Spellbreaker.
Yeah, Defense Spellbreaker exists. Vindicator, right? All of these builds have absurd defensives. It's kind of okay that Reaper has a really strong defensive as well. In fact, I would actually give it the 50% damage reduction. I don't know why. Well, I mean, I don't know why that actually got nerfed, to be frank. I think you could actually give that back. And you can still give it more damage because, again, like Shroud, you know, if you get hit, it is actually kind of annoying sometimes. So it's not like a 100% always tank tool. It's strong, but honestly, it's not that strong. You know, you could very easily look at some of the underperforming DPS builds and just give them a bit more damage, right? There's some low-hanging fruit there. I really would like to see numbers get pushed pretty damn frequently, like maybe even every other patch, or maybe even every patch have like a few little mini hotfix tweaks in there to shuffle things around a little bit, at least for PvE. And then really when it comes to the balance side of things, the balance patches, that's when you go ahead and really attack design, because I think design is what is really holding the game back more so than numbers in a way, right? Because I think a good example of this is stuff like Alacrity Spectre. It's actually a really good build right now. It has good numbers, but to be honest, it's kind of not that much fun, right? Like that's the problem. I think is why people kind of shy away from that build just a little bit.
You know how awful Spectre feels to play at high ping, by the way? Oh my
gosh. Oh yeah, with the canceling? Jesus, yeah.
With the cast times and canceling.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a nightmare. And I really like the fantasy of Spectre, this idea. It's basically like a Shadow Priest style thing, but the wills are awful on high ping. It's not fun at all.
Oh no. Yeah, that's not good. That's not where we want to be. Yeah, how did Virtuoso Distortion survive this? That's a good question. You know, that is a good question, to be fair. And what I just espoused there, it was a bit of a PvE-centric view. Numbers in PvP are a lot harder to handle, I think. But honestly, you know what? I'm going to say I actually do view... this might be a bit of a hot take, because I know that balanced devs are always quite controversial. I actually do view the skills team in Guild Wars 2 as competent right now. I agree with their broad philosophy. I think CMC is steering the game slowly but surely in the right direction, actually. So yeah, I believe they can do it, and I really think they should heavily prioritize it in the coming months, because damn, at this pace, it's going to take so long to fix the game, man. Like, it's going to be years. And I guess that is expected, right? To undo the damage that's been done by... Well, I mean, yeah, let's not get into that. But, you know, it's an MMO, so it's going to take a while. But seriously, it's going to take such a long time to do it right now, which does make me a little bit sad. I'm just saying I want more. I want more. Yeah. And I want more numbers, especially the low-hanging fruit, and I want big design stuff, hopefully in a way that doesn't cause everyone to rage. Boom.
Here's some little design stuff they could do.
Yeah.
Make a list of the 10 skills that have long aftercasts that people are weapon stowing to get more DPS, and just chop the aftercasts off, all of them.
I actually really like that, because they basically attacked NG Pistol with this a fair bit, specifically the auto attack as well. And yeah, I think that looking at stuff like Aftercast, these kind of weird, slightly esoteric mechanics that just raise the skill floor in a not super interesting way are not great. It is a bit weird because, you know, I don't know. It's hard to truly eliminate it because weapon stowing exists. Like, you kind of, because weapon stowing exists, or rather, you know, animation canceling basically exists in the game, you will always be able to get some value out of it. But yeah, maybe like slightly reducing it and targeting that would be a good idea to do.
Could you just not have weapon stow during combat? Is there a reason that you would need...
In PvP, it has a very good use, but in PvE, it does not.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Although in PvE, it can like save you when you're like greatsword rushing off the platform at Sabbatha.
It is nice. Yeah, it is nice. Like, it's a nice mechanic to have, because I think it adds a really fun type of skill expression, but it does have some slightly negative consequences. In PvE, if you removed it from PvP, that would be genuinely awful. I think it adds so much to PvP actually and competitive modes, for sure. So I think that would be untenable. But for PvE, even there, it is still quite nice. Like canceling your ability if it gets out of range, or you want to, you know, your target dies or something like that, and you need to retarget it or use it again, or the boss goes invulnerable or something, you want to save it. Like, there's actually a lot of stuff going on there that I think is actually really nice as a, you know, kind of like final bit of skill progression. You know, one thing that you kind of get in there. I think it's really important. It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the biggest deal, though. Yeah, I think Fidel is right here. It's not the end of the universe. It can be quite impactful on certain builds, but not every.
It's bad on something like Dragon Hunter, which is already kind of down bad. I mean, I guess we'll see what the numbers are after this patch, but like, let's say Dragon Hunter was, you know, at its like 34K or 33K state. Well, if you factor the fact that if you don't weapon stow, now you're down to like 32K. Now the class is like getting just worse and worse before you even had a chance to like buff it. I don't know.
Do you think the skill expression is more important than like balance? Like, I'm sure it'd be much easier to balance if there was no weapon stow. I'm sure, like, it'd just be easy to have more.
Well, it's weird because they do care about benchmarks in their balancing. Like, they do seem to care about those numbers to an extent, and those numbers, especially for stuff like Dragon Hunter or Reaper, are using weapon stowing. Yeah. So that's not the average experience of the average player. So it's like, even if they buff them to like a number that's good for a good player, the average player is going to be like, man, I'm still kind of like trash. I'm still always at the bottom of the list when I raid on this class.
Yeah.
It's a tough question to answer, to be honest, because let's imagine that you ignore weapon stowing. Well, potentially, or like advanced techniques, as it were, potentially you could end up breaking the game a little bit. I don't think that would actually be the case right now. I don't think that, you know, if we ignore weapon stowing on Dragon Hunter, then holy shit, Dragon Hunter's going to break the game on a fundamental level. I don't think that's actually going to be the case. But I think you'd be a little bit careful sometimes. Also, yeah, we have a stream sniper, guys.
Well, plus skill expression, you can express your skill by, you know, through the content, not through like, you know, like if there was more stuff like HTCM, you would express your skill by clearing it or clearing it fast. You know, you wouldn't have to.
Also, yeah, that reminds me.
You wouldn't have to e-peen on benchmarks.
Yeah. I am now ready to complain, okay, about something else. Maybe I'm the only person here. Maybe I'm the only person in Guilds who doesn't like this. But I have started to grow a loathing for the fact that almost every ability is only used for damage these days. And you basically mash every single skill that you have off cooldown to do DPS. Am I crazy on this? Like, there's just something that really pisses me off about using Reaper Shroud 2 in a DPS rotation when it's a mobility skill, right? It annoys me. I don't like it. Skills should not just be things that do damage that you press in a sequence. They should be things that you use for a purpose. Some skills are for damage. That's absolutely fine, right? Some skills are, you know, motility focused. Some are a little bit of a blend. That's okay. But it does really annoy me when it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to use all of my CC skills in my rotation. I'm going to use all of my utility skills in my rotation. And I'm seeing more and more builds go in this direction. And actually, it annoys me. I think it destroys player curiosity to play around with using utility skills to counter the encounter because you use all of them for damage. I think it makes the game a little bit less interesting and less reactive as well. You could argue it adds a skill test that, you need to know when to hold your utility skills that also do damage. And honestly, that's a fair argument, I think. But to be honest, I don't really like it. I don't like that type of gameplay. I think it's actually pretty lame, to be honest, because I like very reactive gameplay, and that would be like proactive gameplay instead, which is a little bit different, which is kind of inevitable in PvE, I guess, but I don't know. I think it's lame. I don't think every ability you have should be a DPS increase. I think quite a lot of your abilities should have a specific purpose that you might use.
Well, especially your utility skills.
Especially those, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a thought.
Yeah. Okay, what is your thought?
This is maybe an unhinged thought.
Do it.
But I actually think that alacrity and quickness have really affected the game in this regard. The
Yeah.
reason is because everything recharges faster and everything activates so much faster. So there's no like slow methodical, okay, we got to let this hit and we got to use it a certain time and then we can use another skill. This makes it so that everything's really spammy. You can use so many skills so quickly that you just hit everything as quickly as possible. If you didn't have that, then suddenly you'd have to think a little bit more about when you were using skills. You'd have to let them play out. The advantage is it does make the game feel really fast and dynamic and exciting, but the problem is that with those, you now necessitate different roles and groups, and you also, we kind of have this forced, really spammy feeling. If we didn't have those, I think skills might matter more.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you had shorter uptime on alacrity and quickness, you'd have actual like burst windows where you're holding that stuff and you're not just using them ad nauseum.
The genie's out the bottle here. I mean, they're never. That's
I know,
never.
they-
I would be the end of the game for me if we had to go back to playing without alacrity. and quickness.
that's never
Okay,
gonna
so
happen,
where I was going with that though is the way that you sort of counter alacrity and quickness is you make increased. The problem is that this would just mean you auto attack more, really, but you would increase cooldowns. But I think they're actually decreasing cooldowns, and I think the reason they're doing that is so that mistakes matter less. Is that a correct take? I don't know. That's just
Yeah, no, I think. Well, yeah. Honestly, I'm not actually
think-
sure if that's true. It's kind of true, but also kind of not true. I think having lower cooldowns makes the game harder to play. Because it requires like more actions per minute, right? It requires you to be able to multitask a bit more. I know what you mean though, because it means that if every ability
from
you
a
use
boon
is
perspective and stuff.
when it comes to boons,
If things are easier to apply, if things
it makes
have
it less
lower
bad if you
cooldowns.
fuck up and you just waste your boons.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah.
Or if you use a high DPS skill into the invuln, well, you're getting that skill back faster, so
Yeah.
it doesn't matter as much.
So one of the design things that has limited them in this regard is that a lot of elite specs get like offhands, so they lose that lever of how to control the power level of that spec, because the skill, you only get 2 new skills and that's not enough to like, you can't go, oh, the spec does 30k, well, we need it to be 40k, well, we only have 2 skills to work with, that we can add power to without buffing the core spec. Like you could go, oh,
yeah.
well, like, so they want to avoid that. So what do? They go, oh, well, let's give it a few utility skills that are DPS increases so that we have more levers to push to pump the power. Well, then you reach the situation where every elite spec uses all their elite skills or uses all their utility skills for damage because they don't have enough levers to separate them without the core balance being thrown off.
Yeah, you do have to be careful there for sure. Because of course that completely spirals into every elite spec. I think that's funny enough. It's one of the things that Elementalist has been really problematic with, right? Is that they try to buff an Ellie spec and it buffs all the Ellie specs, which sometimes that goes a little wrong.
Sort of an issue with Reaper too.
Oh, definitely.
And why it's relatively hard for them to buff Reaper.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we've all just agreed, like, yeah, just give it more damage, forehead. Like why not? Well, it's because they don't have as many levers as you'd think, because the utility skills don't really do anything. So they have the Shroud skills and they have Greatsword that they can really touch, and they have the traits. If you think about what that is, it's 10 skills and 3 traits that they can buff. If you need to add like 30% more damage, which is where they were at one point, that's not a lot of individual things to get 30% more damage out of.
Yeah, here's the thing. In future, I think if they don't do elite specs, you could have basically like when you spec into an elite spec, the weapon skills that you had on that core class are different based on your elite spec.
They should definitely do that.
Yeah.
Like Berserker sort of does it, and that the burst skills change. Like that's, but they should definitely go further. Like
I agree.
Like staff on 10 and Weaver to an extent is similar. Like the skills change, but like yeah, they should be a little bit more aggressive with that. Like
Oh, for sure. I think elite specs you need to play around in changing the mechanic significantly, right? So that the mechanic can be very impactful. Like this is why I mean I think that Reaper has a pretty good solution, right? You can just buff Reaper Shroud. I'd say would be a good way to do it. For sure. Would be pretty interesting. Simply because of the fact that that's the thing that really defines Reaper. It fundamentally changes the way that mechanic operates. So I think that looking at that and improving that is really, really useful. But certainly utility skills as well. Shouts are a bit hard to handle though, right? Like, can you imagine if they made the shouts like higher DPS than Wells? That would actually be disgusting, right? That would be content, that's for sure. Could be interesting. You know, have the little Rise minions pop up and they all hit for like 20k every second. That's big. That's content, guys. You know, it's that is something. But yeah, making sure that you've got enough design space to move around is definitely very important. But yeah, no. All I want is for the game to be reactive, right? And you know, you think about the way you use your abilities with a lot of decision making, rather than just mashing everything off cooldown. It makes me very sad because in my opinion, Guild Wars 2 is like perfectly adapted to this, right? It's a game that is very dynamic, right? So why is it that the game is being designed in a way that isn't dynamic, actually? It's very unfortunate. I do wish in some ways that the game was a little bit more like more traditional MMOs in this regard. When I look at World of Warcraft, I actually notice that almost every class in that game, especially in high-level raid progression, it all has like a piece of utility that it can use, that it can bring something to the table that's interesting or unique in some way. It's got some kind of defensive, something that it can use to help the team. It's like, dude, why don't we have that in Guild Wars 2? We are literally the game that should be doing this, that has a super dynamic and reactive combat system. Why is it that we have, I'm going to press all my buttons on order, and like that's the best we've got, right, on a lot of our builds? That's insane to me. It's like this.
Yeah, I was gonna say people have this impression that like World of Warcraft and stuff are super complicated because you've got like 24 buttons down the bottom. But like the reality is, you press like 5 of them in your damage rotation, and all the rest are like situational abilities. You end up right now in the current Guild Wars 2 landscape, you end up pressing way more buttons in Guild Wars 2 than you do in like WoW or Final Fantasy because you just have so many damage buttons. It's ridiculous.
But yeah, there you go. It's kind of an interesting thing there. That's my complaint. I'm done complaining now, right? And you see, check this out. This is big, Sneb. Check this out. New tactic. I did all of my complaining at the end. So that means that nobody's going to get here. So I'm not going to get flamed, right? This is big. Yeah, I like this. It's very, very nice. Actually,
I don't think I even really complained.
Yeah.
that much. Very little. But
We'll assess the comments for that one.
Yeah. And just real quick,
decide.
I actually really want to quickly address Mechanist here. Guys, not everything is bad about Mechanist. Yeah, I know that there are lots of complaints about Mech, and to be honest, Mech is pretty putrid overall, but actually there are some really good things about Mech. For example, I think it's awesome that when you pick a different trait, your Mech actually has like different arms. I think that's fucking awesome. That is so cool. I love that. I love the idea of that. I actually like how Mech applies Alacrity. That when you apply barrier, you apply Alacrity. That's a very simple idea that doesn't lock you into spamming your utility skills off cooldown. I like that. That's actually a pretty cool design. I like the fact that Mech actually has quite a lot of reactive tools that you can use, like your barrier signet, for example. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. There are obviously plenty of things that I could complain about, like the fact that the pet is Papega and sometimes just walks off into Narnia, and it's kind of annoying. And, you know, the very idea of how passive Mech is as well, you know, in addition to having some reactive components, it has a huge amount of incredibly passive components. We can complain about that. But to be clear, it's not entirely bad. We should never fall into the idea of thinking, oh, everything about this spec is complete garbage. It's horrible in every way. No. That's not the case. No. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think I was going to say, I think whenever they do that, whenever they put alacrity or quickness or whatever onto an actual interaction, that's like when you proc this condition, you get this boon, or when you do a combo field, you get this thing. I think those are way more interesting to play around because you have way more flexibility to make those procs happen. Like some low hanging fruit would be like if you put alacrity on the Tempest trait that heals on auras, it like opens up so much gameplay because you can now you're like thinking about auras and you're thinking about how to proc those auras more often. It's not just press this button and you get this boon, which I think is super uninteractive and super boring.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And just for a comment on something else, like Nike said this about Virtuoso as well, and it's completely true. And this is a great perspective. Virtuoso is actually quite nice in the fact that it's actually pretty easy to get into and has a very kind of simple play style. There are loads of things to complain about it, that it's pretty broken, to be honest, but there are some really good design philosophies there that are actually really interesting. I think you can look at the auto attack on Virtuoso, for example, and you'll notice how it's far less punishing than normal auto attack chains, which is like a big pain point for a lot of players. I think that's a pretty interesting idea, actually, to have stuff like this in the game that basically reduces the skill floor so a class can be easier to play, because that is something that you've got to consider, right? But yeah. Just thought I wanted to kind of mix it up there a little bit and think about that kind of stuff. Yeah. What we have Mech 1 button versus Untamed set. Dude, I mean, Untamed is so much fun though. I'm actually going to be so sad when they kill Fervent Force. Oh man, dude, I like that.
Yeah, that's a fun interactive trait. It's fun.
Yeah,
it's cool.
it is.
Yeah, there's another spec with a really, really razor sharp, well-defined class fantasy. Untamed.
Yeah.
What?
Like
I don't know exactly what it is, but
I'm not sure about that.
I think Spellbreaker at the moment getting Stab on CC, that's a really fun interaction. I think it's really fun.
It's pretty busted as well,
that's
actually.
Cool. It is, but it's heaps fun when Mordramoth comes down to do the doot and you just start like CCing like crazy. You don't have to move anyway. It feels great. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's big. It is big. But anyway. I think that's about it. I like how Topic EU just joined the chat, immediately Sudoku'd, destroyed himself. Interesting. That's content.
Didn't Topic EU play Fortnite? He had a John Wick skin. He was John Wick.
Yeah, Topic was bit. He's a zoomer, right? He's like, yeah, I'm a zoomer. That's how he comes in. He's like, yeah, I zoom. He likes Fortnite. He likes Adventure Quest Worlds. That stuff. Yeah. I think this is a good place to wrap up. Anyone else want to complain about something real quick before we get out of here? Sneb, you got any complaints? You want to?
I'm so upset about AFK farming. I watched. No, I'm just kidding.
Honestly, do you want to gloat a little bit, Nike? I feel like we won the war.
Yeah,
right.
It's time to take a victory lap.
Yeah, I feel like it kind of is. I think we won.
Yeah.
We turned it into a meme. We created a socially acceptable backlash position. Yeah. And then the people that complain about it are now get laughed at, which is the right.
I think the Maguma thing really helped too, because now every thread about it derails into Maguma as well, right? It's so good, actually.
Yeah, there's several counter narratives that you can go with to derail it, which is good.
Yeah, I'm a fan. That's good. I think I guess that's a little bonus meme. Yeah, that's it. We're announcing our victory. GG. It was easy. That's it.
Another successful Condor Dusk operation.
But anyway, yeah. Oh, yeah. I guess I'll mention this because it's really funny. No, I shouldn't, because I think this bug's still in the game. No, I'm not going to mention it. I can tell you why that's happening, Arathor, and there's a very good reason, and it's actually pretty funny. But I'm not going to mention it because it's actually still broken. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay, moving swiftly onwards, gamers. I think that just about wraps things up here. That was a good one. These TeaTimes are firing. This is a good year for podcasts, guys. And maybe I'll even upload this one to Spotify if I can be bothered.
Yes.
But anyway, thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the TeaTime. Please let us know what you think in the comments. Give us your feedback. Give us your comments on our comments throughout this show. Thank you very much to my wonderful hosts for hopping on board. You can check them all out with !hosts in the chat to get some links to these gamers. I actually have had Nike's Twitter wrong for probably like a year at this point. I have only just noticed now. Someone pointed out to me at the beginning of the stream. I will fix that. But yeah, you can't follow them on Twitter through that link because it doesn't work. But anyway, that's that. So, a little bit of shilling time here, a little bit of outroduction. Let's go ahead and make that happen. Sneb, the goose is loose. The bandana is back on. How long are you not going to wash it for this time? Lay it on us.
I'm going to wear it until they release Wing 8.
Ooh.
Ooh. Sweaty bandana.
Yeah, it is super glued to my head. No.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Yeah, no. Hey everybody, I'm Sneb. I like raids, as you can probably tell. I help people get into raid groups, which is kind of fun. Fun and exciting. We have over 80 groups in the Skane gang. We have like 7 on EU and most are on NA. But if you'd like to join, discord.gg/Skane gang. SKEINGANG. Or you can find me personally at twitch.tv/Snebzor or on Twitter as well by the same name.
Okay, boom. Check all that stuff out here. Okay, up next, it is the PsyOps leader of Guild Wars 2. It is it is Nike.
Yep, that's me. I'm a Guild Wars 2 YouTuber and a Zwift streamer. So if you're interested in either of those things, check me out.
Yeah, I think you
Google me, Chuck.
Yeah. Yeah, you had some pretty big... I've actually just got to quickly congratulate you. I feel like you've coined a new term today by referring to the LFG as noob stink. I mean,
Yeah,
that was gold, right? I admit it. I think you got me good with that one, right? Like, like...
Noob stink is a great term. Like,
Yeah.
like once you it's like Jill Adrin's guild has noob stink. Like it has a funk about it, and you just want to get away from it.
Oh boy.
But anyway, make sure to have a look at those links. And okay, the instigator, the debate lord. It is Bloom. What are you up to these days?
Hi. I'm Guild Wars 2 YouTuber. Sometimes I stream on YouTube, but mostly I just make Guild Wars 2 videos for like the semi-casual audience. So if you want more noob stink, you can come to my YouTube channel. We got it all there. And if you want to hear my opinions and stuff on Guild Wars, that's it.
All right.
Yeah, make hot take
Okay. So make sure to check out all those links for all the noob stink you can possibly smell. But there it is. You can find that below the stream and, of course, below the YouTube video as well. So make sure to check that out. Hop on board all of our various Discord servers. Follow all of our social media. You guys know the drill. Watch all the other tea times. Maybe this will be on Spotify. If it isn't, Sneb is going to bully me. And I don't want to be bullied, so I better get on that ASAP. So then you can listen there as well instead of having to watch a YouTube video and just have it, you won't have to see us anymore. Okay, that's basically what I'm getting at here. But anyway, stay tuned for all of that. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Follow my stream, subscribe on YouTube, like the video, leave a comment, post it everywhere. Okay, make sure our victory lap is, about AFK farming is heard loud and wide. And of course, we will see you all next time. Thanks for watching, gamers. Take it easy, and hope you enjoyed the show. Farewell, my friends. See you later.
See you, fellas.